Recording paused. Okay, now we are recording. I'm gonna stand up because that's what we do. And for the pledge of, oh, actually, we'll say this is 7 o'clock. This is the Town of Newtown Town Council regular meeting for Wednesday, March 18th, 2020, at 7 o'clock. You've all got a revised agenda on your town iPads. The first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance and roll call. So I'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and lead it. I pledge of allegiance to the flag
of the
United
United States of America
and to the republic
Republic
for which it
which
stands,
stands
one nation,
nation
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
and
justice.
justice for all.
Okay, we can take our seats. Vice Chairman, would you take the roll call, please?
Certainly. Tom Butterworth.
Here.
Robin Bates Mason.
Here.
Liz Donovan.
Here.
John Engel. Sven England.
Here.
Mark Jemski.
Here.
Steve Carl. Mike Morrow.
Here.
Maria Naughton.
Here.
Christina Ross.
Here.
Rich Townsend. Here. Penny Young.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. So the first order of business is the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the regular meeting and the special public hearing meeting held on February 12th, 2020, and the special public hearing meeting held on February 26th, 2020?
So I will move all of them.
Who was that? You have to say your name.
Sven will move all of them.
Okay, Sven moves all of them. Do I have a
Christina seconds.
Okay, Christina seconds. All in favor, raise your hand. We have a recording of that. Looks like we have enough hands. The minutes are approved. I couldn't see Sven's hand, but since he made the motion, we'll give him credit for a vote. Public comments. Members of the public are welcome to speak to the town council on agenda topics scheduled for review and/or vote. Speakers are requested to provide their name and street address, and comments will be limited to 2 or 3 minutes, subject to the total number of speakers. I suggest that in the order in which you put your name and address in the chat box, we will recognize you and you can speak to us. So if anybody would like to open up the chat window and put their name in, they can participate in public comments. All right, if it would appear that nobody wants to make public comments, so shout out if you would like to make comments and we can record your name and address in a moment. Okay, there being no public comments, we'll move on to item number 4, Town Council overview of budget, discussion of Town Council priorities and goals. I probably should have prepared some remarks, but I didn't. I guess all I can say is that the question that keeps getting asked is, have the events of the last 2 weeks caused us to rethink the entire budget? And should we start over? And should we make major changes to the budget? and in consultation with most of you, with the first selectman, with Todd Lavieri and members of the Board of Finance, I think that the desire of the town leadership is that we move forward. We vote for our budget. We debate our budget the same way we always do. So we'll have a public debate right here virtually. We'll vote on that budget on April 3rd. If any of you want to identify specific projects in the budget or line items, same as any year, we'll be able to, we'll debate those issues. But at this point, I think it's important to say and to reinforce to the public that the town continues to operate, and the town is going to continue to provide services, police services, parks and rec services, fire services, education services, and life is going on with as much normalcy as we can give it. So that's why we're here tonight, to debate the budget, pass a budget. And I say that because people say, well, maybe we should institute a spending freeze. That's not why we're here tonight. We can debate, I guess, aspects of a spending freeze, but we're here to pass a budget. And I'm optimistic that we're going to do our job and give our department heads the confidence that they can do their jobs. Does anybody have any comments that they'd like to add to that? Especially the first selectman.
Well, John, I would say, first of all, we're dealing with a budget that is already very lean. And on the town side, we worked hard to meet the guidance that was issued. At this point, I think you might want to consider having the Board of Finance come back and at your meetings next week and address their views on whether the world changed and what that means, whether they would have done anything differently. But otherwise, I think you're already dealing with a very lean budget. And also, we can always make course changes next year in the course of the budget year as far as not spending things. But I'd rather do that than come back and try to ask for more money if we cut now. So.
Okay, anyone else?
Well, I love the idea of having Board of Finance come back. And I also would love to have a target for what the overall outcome would be that we could work from, but I know that's not on your agenda tonight. And I do second Kevin's suggestion that there's nothing to tinker with on the town budget.
You know, if anything though,
Kevin's muted.
Oh,
we may be looking at wanting to increase the health reserves based upon a different guidance from the health consultants before you vote on April 2nd, John, not April 3rd.
so would that require us to go back to the Board of Finance and they would make the change and then we would vote on that?
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not suggesting you can increase the budget at this point, but at least don't cut it. So if we have to reallocate money, we're likely to see more expense as a result of this crisis in terms of than less.
Right. Right. Anyone else? You want to raise your physical hand or raise your hand? Go ahead, Rich.
I think Kevin's got some good ideas here. I would just come back and bring up that the state would allow us to defer our conclusion by 30 days. I think it's better if we don't do that. But if anybody else wants to debate that, I think that would be worth debating, because I think it would be better to get this budget behind us and get everybody continuing to work on the crisis at hand rather than on the budget.
I concur. I think you said it best. That was what I was trying to say, Rich. That's exactly what I was trying to say. I would like to pass the budget, a budget, on time so that they can get back to the job in front of them. And if we have to add more money to particular department budgets, then we'll do so, as the situation warrants. But we have to give them the confidence that they can begin to plan for July 1st based on a knowable budget. Christina?
I would just like to suggest that we put a line item, not we because we can't add to the budget, but the Board of Finance, a line item to account for COVID expenses.
The Board of Finance, under the emergency order, we're authorized to go to the Board of Finance and ask for more money.
Okay.
We've already anticipated, Linda, what number did they mention? Maybe $150,000. So large part of which may be reimbursable by federal government.
Yeah, I understand, but how much is that line item?
Again, that'll be a special appropriation
Okay,
because we're in the current budget year.
okay.
We don't have that money beyond the contingency is already spoken for to some extent.
Okay, if there's nothing further on the overview of the budget, and you can shout out, oh, is that you, Maria?
Yes. Is there any category that special appropriation would have to fall into? If it's related to an emergency?
Well,
Like if they have to provide more teachers to meet special ed needs, which now are dispersed rather than in one place, would that be covered?
Well, we've talked about on the town side, as far as the public safety agencies and stuff, I haven't heard anything from the superintendent, but Tom, and you might chat with the superintendent about that. It has to qualify as emergency type expenses related to this COVID crisis.
I mean, I think it would be smart to ask if there's anything that they haven't purchased yet that they could hold off on in case there's other expenses that are unanticipated, like the teachers making home visits. If there's some way to catch it. I know we're in this budget year, but rather than have an over expenditure and have to ask for it later, why not ask departments to sort of think about what they don't really need right now because things have changed a bit.
But Maria, when you just talked about special ed, the superintendent already can go back and take up to $1 million back on the excess cost grant.
As of a few days ago, the superintendent had not identified any dollar amounts, so that would be a work in progress if they need to come back at all.
Anything further? Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. I know a lot of work has gone into the budget for quite some time. The events that we're experiencing right now are obviously unprecedented. I think when we went into the budget season and whenever the department started working on their budgets, and when the Board of Finance reviewed their budget, when they formulated their budget guidance, I think it was all based on certain assumptions moving into next year. Tax collections, economic conditions. Obviously that's all changed dramatically for the worse. The fact that the stock market value has now all been wiped out for the past 3 years. I know the last several years during the budgets that I've been involved with, we've kept saying, this will be our hardest one. There could be a recession coming. Well, I think we all know now that it's here. Who knows how long this will last? To go back to the drawing board for any of the departments at this particular time, I don't think it was going to be fruitful. But there's a quandary here, right? Because the budget was based on assumptions, and those assumptions are no longer valid. They just simply aren't. And a lot of people in this town, I'm sure many are getting very, very damaged by the conditions right now in the market, and will take a very long time to recover. My concern now is passing a budget that will result in a tax increase. And I don't know how we can address or avoid that at this particular point. So I'm kind of just more making a statement about the struggle that I have here, I think is before all of us. And we're just in a really, really unfortunate position. And I don't know how we can really address it if we can at all. I wish we could stay flat on spending. Most of our costs are locked up in fixed labor costs, as we all know, and as I've been saying repeatedly. So whether there is a recession or not, the fact is there are labor contracts, and there are legal obligations to pay underneath, pay according to those contracts. So it's not like we can't allocate the funds for that. So I just, we're in just an odd new reality right now. And I'm just so concerned about handing the taxpayers even the slightest of an increase. I think they'll look at us not exactly thrilled about having that. So again, it's more of a statement. Maybe I'm articulating some points that maybe some feel. I don't know if I have a true solution to it. It's a feeling that's out there, in the community. It's kind of just a statement.
Well,
I think it's very valid to make these statements. I think we need, between the 12 of us, to articulate what we're hearing in the community and the fears that are in the community. But we're also here to say we're watching it, but with the best information we have today, we're going to focus today on these department budgets and give them an indication of how much they can begin to spend on July 1st so that they can begin to plan for that. But as you point out, things will change, and we may have to make different decisions 3 months from now, along with the first selectman and the Board of Finance. Shall we move on to the budget review?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll begin with Linda Asmani. I believe, I believe you can share documents to all of us. I don't need to or I can give you the host privileges.
No, I think I can share. Let me share my document.
Okay.
Is it on our tablet?
You also have I have my tablet open in front of
Right,
me.
and the documents are also on your tablet, but I'm going to share the document on my screen here if I can remember how to do that.
Should be a big green button on the bottom, share screen.
might be just
There
as
it
easy. Okay.
There we go. Not sure how much of this you can see.
I can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is on your tablet, so I'll just walk through this. So the first page is essentially just looking at the summary of revenues, and then at the bottom are the summary of expenditures. And you can see that our total revenue at this point, I'm looking at the BOF recommended, which is a column just before the blue shades. We have a total budget revenues of 148.9 million and a total expenditure budget of 153.6 million. And the difference between that is the $5 million that's currently budgeted in use of fund balance. The first two columns in the blue, these columns here, is just the variance from the recommended, Board of Finance recommended budget to the FY20 current year revised budget. And I have it as whole numbers and percentages. So you'll see that total revenues budget are a little over $1 million higher than in the revised budget, which is 0.7%. What Richard had me do also was to also do a 3-year cumulative increase over time, and therefore that's what that very last column is. So 3-year cumulative growth is about 0.3% in total. And then the next series of numbers below are the expenditure items by the major functional areas, and I believe I have them sorted by cost, and therefore you see that the Board of Ed right now is at 92 million, which on aggregate is 0.6% growth, but the total budget as it sits now is 1.3% higher over the prior year, and on a 3-year growth is 1.9. The next chart that you're looking at is basically the breakdown of the budget by smaller units as identified by the Board of Finance. This is probably a chart you're familiar with, and therefore you can see here what the town operations, if I begin at the very top, you'll see that in the blue column, the Board of Finance has recommended 28.4 million for town operations, which is down 1.77%, and the 3-year growth is at 2.69. It is important to point out that we're kind of, in this scenario, we're mixing apples and oranges because you're comparing actual expenditures in FY17, 18, and 18, 19 with budget numbers in 19, 20, and 2021. Typically, our budget numbers come in below, our actual numbers come in below our budget numbers, and therefore that 3-year growth is somewhat skewed because it's taking into account budget numbers in the last 2 years versus actual numbers, and therefore, but it gives you a sense of where we are in terms of growth, and therefore you'll see town operations, Board of Ed budget. You'll see the two chunks, the operations budget, and then the transfer to the internal health fund, and this is after the adjustments that were made at the very last meeting on adoption night. And therefore, if you follow it all the way down, you see that 153 million number, which is a 1.33% year over year. The next chart is looking at the revenues segmented into the major revenue categories. You'll see that tax collections at this point are about 140.2 million, which is 0.83% over the prior year. And then again, that very last column, that 3-year growth is at 0.52%. And if you go down, the list is just all those individual revenue items. You'll see that the ECS, the excess cost grant that Kevin was just referring to, that one is budgeted at $1 million, the same as it was in the prior year. These are actually numbers that are in the governor's budget, and therefore in the past couple of years, we've been comfortable with receiving those dollars. But again, with what's going on around the state, it's a bit of unknown. But for now, we have the budgeted numbers as they've been presented. And so we've budgeted for those. And then at the very bottom of this, you'll see how much we anticipate to collect from taxation based on the budget and the $5 million fund balance drawdown. You'll see that the mill rate, if this budget exists as is, with the grand list as is, the mill rate will go from 18.240 to 18.257, which is a 0.09% growth in the grand list. And then the 3-year compounded annual growth is 3.08 if you go back to that 16.669 grand mill rate back in 17-18. And overall amount to be collected from taxation in the current year is 139.6 million, which is up from the 138.4 million in the prior year, which is a 0.8% growth year over year. And then the last 2 slides I wanted to show was just on our capital budget. I think that's where I understand most of the discussion will be. And therefore, these are some ratios, budget ratios, as identified by the Board of Finance Debt Management Committee. And so those are there for your reference. And then I also included some charts just to kind of show our debt trends over time. And over time, this is what's been happening with the debt. And year-over-year growth, you'll see our outstanding debt peaked in FY07 at 148.06%. Right now, we'll end the year at a little over 107 million. And based on the capital budget, it goes up slightly, but again, keep in mind that the capital budget is just based on the budget as approved, as presented, not as approved. So for the future years, we know that those numbers are going to drastically change and they're going to go down, and therefore that growth in the shaded area, these numbers in the shaded area are probably going to be less than the numbers that are here. This is just the numbers as been requested by the department. And that's all I had in terms of a budget overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Linda, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that one of the things that strikes me on this, and I agree with doing it, which is the drawdown of the funds from the general fund, drawdown of $5 million in the plan this year. And it was $4 million last year. And the 2 years prior to that, we were actually building the general fund balance. And so I would just point out that with the compound growth rates that you can see in all of the different areas on the side, to get to the mill rates, which are growing at 3%, we have effectively used up $5 million of our rainy day fund this year and $4 million last year. Did I say that right, Linda?
Somewhat. So again, on this chart, if I'm going to highlight this contribution from the general fund, you'll see that in FY17-18, the number there is blank, and so is the number in 18-19. We actually had budgeted drawdown in both of those years, but because of how we budget for revenues and how we budget for expenditures, we actually ended up not drawing down in those years. So if you see it here, revenues less expenditures, in this year, 17-18, whereas we had budgeted to draw down from the fund balance, we actually added $2.2 million. And last year, rather than draw down from the fund balance, we actually added 1.8 million. And therefore, although this year we're also budgeting a $4 million drawdown, based on the spending trends and based on the revenue trends, I doubt that we will draw down $4 million. And likewise, in the year that follows, we budget for a $5 million drawdown, but I doubt that we will draw down the fund balance by $5 million. But for budgeting, we need to show that number because we need to present a balanced budget of revenues, expenditures, and where we make up the revenue. I don't know if that answers your question, Richard.
No, that does, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I would just, as we start to go into the rest of the presentations here, I would just like to say one thing, and that is, I've been struck over the last week by the massive problems identified by the business economy across the country. Boeing asking for a $60 billion loan, et cetera. Delta executives taking a 50% pay cut. And I think it just highlights the possible problems that could be ahead of us. And I would just say that as I look at this, I believe that we still are very tight from an operating standpoint. And I think that from an operating standpoint, in the short term, I think it would be very hard to save much money as a result of all the contractual obligations. And so looking at this budget, I think that that we don't require that much focus. I think Kevin and everybody else and Todd and their groups have done a great job of tightening those down. But I would suggest that what we had planned on doing was really taking a careful look at the capital. And I think as we really don't know what's going on going forward, I think spending as little capital and delaying as much as we can is a wise thing to do. That is the place where you can save cash in the short term. And if it turns out that there's not a problem, you can turn it back on and do it. And so I would just, what I'm going to be looking for as we go through here is which areas could we not take out of the plan, but delay. And maybe we only delay them for 6 months, but 6 months from now, things could be very different than they are today. So I think the capital plan is really the place to look if we're trying to, and I think we should be trying to put money aside for what Mike talked about, just unknown things. I believe we're going to probably spend more than this budget on operations as a result of things that are coming up from the COVID problem. So I just wanted to get that off my chest at the beginning here.
It occurs to me that in the last few years, maybe 5 years ago, when we had financial issues, the town council decided to form through an ordinance the audit committee to help us understand risk and to evaluate the town audit and to talk to us about risk. Maybe this would be a good time to ask the audit committee to prepare a summary and present it to us during the budget season about how they feel about the current risky environment. Specifically, I would ask them about liquidity. What is the town's, do we have any risk if liquidity is a problem, in the bond markets? Are we going to continue to be able to borrow like we always have? Do we have a revenue problem? Will we have, are there other issues? I don't know what those risks are, but would it make you feel better, Rich, if we had the audit committee come in and talk to us about those risks and study it?
It would really make me feel better if either the audit committee or the finance committee or both would think about those issues. I know in the business community, everybody's very worried about the liquidity they will have to be able to hold their breath until things turn around.
Okay.
I think it's valuable to think about.
Okay. Well, we'll work on that. The first selectman and I and Linda will get with the audit committee and we'll see, because you're asking questions that a lot of people are asking. So we should get a presentation on what's changed in the last 2 weeks for us with respect to liquidity and borrowing. Okay, Linda, is that the end of the presentation?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Anyone else have other questions?
Well, on the audit committee, so revenues are on your list, right? You're going to ask them about revenues.
Right, exactly. I mean, we have historically been collecting 99.5 or greater of our tax collections. I would ask them, for instance, or Linda, to go back and say, during financial crisis times, do we collect all our revenue? And how much longer does it take us to collect all our revenue? Those kinds of questions. I mean, we've gone through financial crises before, and I suspect, but I don't know without doing the research, that we collect our revenue. It just takes us longer, and that would put a burden on liquidity. Are we going to run out of cash? And I think that's the question on everyone's mind. Are we going to run out of cash? Right now, my understanding is we have $20 million in our reserves, because that's what the Board of Finance has set as a corridor. And so we are fully reserved. But if the audit committee and the Board of Finance begin to think that we ought to rethink our reserves, that's the kind of question we should be asking.
We could model it based on trends we saw in 01 and 02 and what we saw in 08, 09 and see, of what we had assessed, what were our collection rates, and so forth. Those are some recent examples, and see how we did then as a model for how we could potentially, it's not, I mean, nothing is sure, but that'll give us at least some trend information.
Okay. Anyone else?
I emailed Debbie that very question probably about a half hour ago. So I'm sure, Linda, you'll get a much more detailed description of what that experience was during this, particular time.
Okay. Good. Anyone else?
John, on that point, though, I'd make the comment that at least the 2008 crisis, I think that we were on an uptrend in spending going into 2007. And we are now, actually, look over the past few years, we've actually been reducing our spending. So I think you got to look at when we've been trying to reduce spending, and if we have a crisis, it's different than you were spending a lot coming into a crisis.
I think that's fair. I think that I know very little about how this resembles the 2008 crisis, or maybe the 1980 crisis, or the 1987 crisis. So I'm going to rely on Linda and the Board of Finance experts to tell me whether we should be thinking differently, because it's on everybody's mind. Okay, if there's no further questions for Linda. And now we have an action item that we will go and we will begin to put together a summary, and we'll have that summary during our budget season from Linda and the Board of Finance members. So if there's nothing further for Linda, let's move to the police. Leon, I believe we've scheduled 20 minutes, but you can take as long as you like. Do you want to share your screen? There
Yes,
we go.
just did that. Before I start, I'd like everyone on this call, and frankly, everyone in town, to commit to thinking of our first responders, fire, police, EMS, that are on the front lines of this crisis and are doing exceptional work, and they're putting themselves at risk every day. While most of the folks in our nation are working from home, these folks are out there putting themselves at risk. So put them in your thoughts and prayers, because we all want them to be safe. And financial discussions are critical, but certainly the lives that they're saving and the work that they're doing shouldn't go unnoticed. So I'll begin. I'm going to touch on animal control, capital, and operating. Then I'm going to talk about police, your return on investment, our goals for 2020, capital with a focus on our building and the need for the renovation, our vehicles, and I'll finish with operating and overtime. I'm going to be very efficient because most of my time is going to be spent on talking about our building and the need for renovation. So budget building process, we're very careful on how we build our budget and what we need and how we're able to protect and serve our great town. And we're very thoughtful and conservative. Animal control certainly performs a great function in our town, and very lean budget, decrease of 7.21 compared to FY20, no capital request. That's a pretty lean budget right there, given the great work that our animal control folks do. I'm going to push on to the police department, talk about your return on investment, which is something we need to focus on because of the great work that our officers do for our town. That's a snapshot of what we do. I'll give you a comparison of 2019, 2018. We all have seen in the news great work that our officers did last year. They saved 6 lives. They investigated and successfully prosecuted, it's in process, a murder, missing person investigation that I believe will be the model for the rest of our nation. They did exceptional work, and was a model in teamwork and law enforcement expertise and leveraging technology. So you should all be very proud of the work they did.
Thank you.
Some more highlights. We're one of the only 3 CALEA accredited agencies in Fairfield County, only 13% in Connecticut, and only less than 5% nationally. That, I think, makes us a great agency and helps us perform to the highest level. And certainly, we worked a complex missing person murder investigation, which was made national, international headlines. And I think all of you should be exceptionally proud of the work that was done despite the tragedy. We reduced motor vehicle accidents by 9%, which is a continuing goal. And our sworn officer is very diverse. We're about 1/3 African-American, Hispanic, and female. So that's another thing we're very proud of, how diverse our staff is and the high level that they perform each and every day. We implemented a crisis intervention team because we're seeing more and more behavioral health incidents, and that's increasing. And just this week, there's been multiple psychiatric calls and behavioral health calls. So that's a critical aspect for us. Tied in with that is we were the first agency in Connecticut to adopt something called a Ebola wrap. It's a less than lethal tool that allows us to take people into custody with a Kevlar type wrap, and hopefully it doesn't cause any injury to the person or to the officer. And we're proud that we're able to innovate and use tools that other agencies are a little reluctant to adopt. As I mentioned, we saved 6 lives in 2019. That's something everybody should be proud of. Certainly, there's no better thing than saving a life. Handled many complex criminal investigations and tragedies to the highest level. We continue to leverage our participation in Cyber Task Force, and we're always focusing on reducing the availability of drugs because that's certainly tied into behavioral health. That's a little bit of marijuana that we seized from my investigation. So that tells you what's out there. It's pretty incredible. And sadly, our town isn't immune from all the problems the rest of our nation face with behavioral health and substance use and abuse. So that continues to be a focus area for us. We continue to work closely with our schools to minimize the availability of drugs to our youths. And we're hopeful once this crisis passes that we're able to finalize the K-9 in schools MOU and get our K-9 into the schools to further reduce the possibility of our kids bringing drugs to school and causing the many things that affect someone's life with a drug use. And another thing we're very proud of is enhancing community policing. Coffee with a Cop and Civilian Police Academy are 2 of the many things that we do to build connections with our community. We'll continue to focus training on officer safety and use of force. Once this crisis is over, we certainly plan to do a tabletop critical incident exercise, and frankly, we're planning that right now as we're moving through this crisis, and continue to educate our residents about crime prevention, locking your car, and suspicious activity. We will conduct targeted enforcement at high accident locations and enhance crisis intervention training and response. And we're hopeful to move our PD building renovation forward. So now I'm going to talk about our PD building renovation, why it's such a dire need. And certainly the visual impact of it, I think, is pretty telling, and it's obvious that this needs to happen. Our building's 94 years old, 4 years old. You can need that right-hand corner is a sick emoji. Our building's pretty sick, needs to be fixed, and we have a plan in place that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. You can see those sketches there. That's a 1926 Model T Ford. That's when the building was built. That's a class actually in front of the building, and there's another older picture of the building. So that tells you how old and how much work this building needs. And 39 years ago was the last renovation. That was 1981. And I suspect very few people have 1981 vehicles that they drive every day. So that's a visual impact there. Tells you the dire need, and the inner workings of our building are kind of similar to this engine on the left-hand side here. And so we need to make this happen. You can see many other buildings since 1981 have been renovated. We're at the bottom of the list there in 1981, so it's time for us. Fire's been done, EMS has been done, and I might add, during this whole crisis, we're one of the few buildings that are fully operational and staffed as we're continuing to protect and serve our great town and do the good work and put our officers at risk. So that's another reason why this needs to happen. You can see our building infrastructure is not in great shape and needs a lot of work. Our furnace is failing, air conditioning, sewer, windows, doors, exterior walls, electrical system, foundation. And in the upper right-hand corner there, you see the sewer fly. If anybody's met a sewer fly, you don't want to meet one. And sadly, they're often in our locker room, in our men's locker room, interacting with our officers. And that's like something we like to fix. And we want to avoid the risk and expense of systems failing. That's a Lapham Community Center, and that's a trailer there that has a boiler that's been brought on because of a failure there. One of our boilers is more than 15 years old. The other one is well over 20 years old, and they're quite expensive to fix. So that's one of the many things that needs to be corrected in our building. Our boilers need to be replaced. Infrastructure, electrical, plumbing, everything pretty much. Our building is crumbling. Those pictures are recent pictures, and lots of work needs to be done to bring us up to the standard that needs to be. Water's leaking in our lower level area. That points to some kind of foundation problem that needs to be corrected. Certainly potential for growing mold is there when you see water leaking in like that. And in fact, that picture there shows a connection between the ambulance corps and the police department. We provide HVAC to the building next door. And that's something certainly that needs to be looked at and corrected during this renovation. Federal and state building standards. We don't meet building standards for sprinklers, hardened walls, ADA compliance, evidence storage, jail cells, or interview rooms. Certainly we all should be meeting standards, but sadly our building is not. Department needs, our Sally Port isn't effective. It's not ideal. Evidence processing is lacking ventilation and fire suppression. Our women's locker room is at capacity. I'm very proud to say that we have the highest number of female officers ever in our history, but we can't hire another one because our female locker room is at capacity. So certainly that needs to be corrected and that room needs to be expanded so we can hire as many female officers as possible. Evidence storage is lacking. It's scattered around the building in multiple areas. It's not an ideal situation. And our parking lot security is lacking as well. And these are all issues that can be corrected in the renovation. And one point that a lot of folks don't appreciate is we have the highest number of staff other than BOE, and certainly points to the need for us to give this building a good renovation and put it in a proper state for the officers that work here and do the great work that they do each and every day. Certainly competition in Connecticut's very extreme right now. There's over 40 departments trying to hire officers. And the best and brightest, much like corporations, sometimes they get attracted by a newer building. And we're going to show you some newer buildings in our area that sometimes attract away the candidates that we would like to hire. And retention is another issue. We like to retain our employees, and certainly having a safe, clean, new, modern work environment keeps retaining employees. Stanford Police Department was just completed, $44 million. Beautiful building if you haven't seen it. Norwalk Police Department, completed in 2005, also a very beautiful building, nearly 58,000 square feet. Darien Police Department, 2012, very comparable size to us, 17.8 million. Newtown Police Department, in process of being completed, 14.8 million. They have very comparable staff to ours, 45 sworn, 12 civilian, 25,000 square foot building there. Looks to be a beautiful building and appropriate for modern day policing. So we've gone through a decade of requests and approvals through every budget. And we recently engaged a couple of architectural firms through the First Selectman's leadership and provided cost estimates for a bunch of scenarios. And I got to thank Stuart Salvini for his great leadership and help in moving this project forward and getting a very careful analysis. And if we're going to spend the town's money, Stuart is the guy you want to do your analysis. And we considered 4 different scenarios: renovate our existing building on South Avenue, build a new building on a new site, build a new building on an existing site, or purchase an existing building and renovate. And now we get into some very rough but very accurate cost estimates. From left to right, you can see that renovate the existing building is around 12 million. New building, new location is around 11, contingent on selling the existing building for around 4 million. Build new on the existing site is the next one, third from the left. And then the last opportunity there is renovate another building. Any questions about our building renovation? This is really something I'd like to focus on.
If you built a new building in a new, I'm going to ask about the difference between A and B, because they're not very different in price. Building new on a new location and renovating the existing building are roughly about the same price at 11.5 versus $12 million. Is that assuming that renovating the existing building gives you all of the same functionality and all of the same size and is on paper identical to a new building?
No, a new building would be the optimal situation. We could build it for a police department purposes rather than repurposing the school, which is our existing building. So certainly building new in a new location would be the best scenario for us. We could build precisely what we need. It would be more efficient, more effective, and I think the long-term investment would be a better result. The challenge is finding the right location in our town where we could build a police department. And that has proved to be challenging.
But it is the preferred course of action. We would get a better building than we would if we renovated the existing building.
That would be the ideal course of action if we can find a suitable location to build it, yes.
And a suitable location, let me just, I'm just wondering on a couple of basic things. Is it important that it be basically in the downtown, or does it need to be on one of our major roads, our state roads, 106, 124, 123? I mean, what constitutes an acceptable location?
Frankly, our location right now is ideal, but something near the center of town on a state road, not too far removed. 123 is probably a little bit too far away. 106 might be okay if we could find a location. 124 is ideal. So somewhere near the center of town, somewhere on a main road, is probably the best location. And Stuart and all the folks on the team have looked out virtually every town-owned piece of property. And the result was we couldn't find an ideal location to build a new building. So the second best but good alternative is to renovate existing building. I think that's our option. We'd love to find a place to build a new building, and that would be the most cost effective and best case scenario. If we can't do that, which we've exhausted pretty much every possibility, then renovate the existing building is the next best alternative, and that'll allow us to move forward quickly.
And in option B, there is no land cost there. So that's $11.5 million plus the cost of the land, correct?
Yes, that's contingent on finding a town-owned land. That wouldn't be any cost, but certainly if we had to pay for land, that would increase the bottom line.
And it would also assume that we could sell the existing building to a private party for $4 million.
Yes, we could, and we would want to sell, yes.
Anyone else on this slide? You have other slides?
For the building? No.
This is it. Okay, so open it up to the floor. Any of you, do the town council have questions of Leon? Go
I'll
ahead.
take one, John.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Chief, one of the things that it works so well in that location is the EMS building next door. Can you, the synergy of having the ambulance next to you there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's a nice campus in that regard, that we're able to have the EMS right next door, and we can go there for various things and training and cooperation. And certainly in time of crisis like now, we're working hand in hand with our EMS folks, and having them close by is critical. So that's kind of like, we're trying to do our due diligence here, and we believe that building new at a new location is ideal from a long-term basis. But we weren't able to find any kind of land that was owned by the town where we could build our station. So the next best alternative in the ideal location is to renovate our existing building.
Can you
And then
build
maybe, oh, sorry, John.
behind the existing building? Is there any room on the existing campus?
That's possible. I think that could be explored. There's a possibility of certainly revamping the campus and doing that. But I think that third option from the left is build new and existing site. Those are the numbers that we came through with. So that's certainly a different perspective than renovate existing.
That means
Is there any drawback, John, I'm sorry, is there any drawback, Chief, in terms of the building itself, because it was designed as there's been talk how it's got barriers inside the building that create unusable spaces in terms of being able to blow out the whole inside of the building. Can you comment on that?
Yes, that's accurate. There are many designs within our building that we can't change because of structural walls and things like that, large stairwells that are difficult, if not impossible to change. And that results in inefficient use of space. But certainly if we do renovate our existing building, we can gut each floor and create as much effective use of space as possible. But given it's a school and it's a repurposed building, there's certain limitations that are just inherent in that.
In the current budget, how much money do you have in this year to study these four? I think you have a design budget this year, right?
Yeah, that's I believe it's in the public works line, the buildings line. I think it's 500,000 and change for design, engineering, et cetera.
And we can't spend that money until we decide between A, B, C, or D, right?
That's probably the smart thing to do. Sure, figure out which direction you're going in, and then start spending the money.
And since that $500,000 is in the current year, that means that we're going to have to make that decision by what month, whether we're going down path A, B, C, or D.
You know, I mean, that's hard to say. I think it'll depend on the collective leadership of the town determining what direction we go in. You know, I think Kevin's kind of leading this whole charge, and his great leadership in getting us a building renovation or something is instructive in that regard. So I'll lead it to him to determine the timeline and how we're going to move forward with that.
Can I? Two things. One, we're waiting for Westcog is commissioned and is paying for a study of regionalizing the police in Wilton, Wilton, Reading, Ridgefield, and Buchanan. That study should be done next month. So we were waiting for that study. I don't know, at most, we're probably going to be looking to possibly sharing a training firing range with Wilton or more than one town. And then secondly, the $500,000 in the current year budget will carry over into the next year.
Okay, so the $500,000 does not have to be spent until we know which direction we're going, and we'll just carry it over into the following year if necessary. But we're basically, by putting $500,000 in this year's budget, giving you permission to go ahead and begin that planning.
Right, it's a capital project, so we that capital project is already in motion, but we haven't spent any of it yet.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have a quick question. Will that $12 million price tag, I know might be regionalization with this, but would that include a shooting range?
It would not. No.
It would not.
There's an inherent limitation in our existing building. There just isn't a proper space to put a long enough shooting range that allows us to qualify. So given the expense of the shooting range, that is not in the budget for the renovated existing.
Okay, so it would either be shared with Wilton or have the trailer come once a year.
Well, the logical thing to do, frankly, is because of the incremental use of a range is to share it with another agency or several agencies. So that's why it's a smart thing to explore that with Westcog and see if that's a possibility to share with Wilton, Ridgefield, whoever might be interested. And that's something that Ridgefield does now and works very effectively. So that, you know, it's a public-private partnership, but certainly that's one area of a shared use that makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
Leon,
Yeah.
are there other areas that you've explored for shared use besides the shooting range that you've rejected or are continuing to look at?
Yes. Over the years, we've explored shared dispatch. There's virtually no cost savings, and it would affect the service to our residents. So that's something we X'd off the list. Another item which has been brought up is shared jail or holding cells. And that really isn't effective. We're not going to save any money by doing that, given the operational costs of bringing prisoners or arrestees outside our jurisdiction and contractual obligations that we have. So those are the two primary ones. And the one conclusion we came to was a shared shooting range training facility makes a lot of sense. And there would be some cost savings there. So that's one area we would love to explore.
Has there been any work done on shared evidence storage? I know that's a problem you have and might free up more space in the existing building if you were to redo the existing building.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problematic issue if we were to push our evidence storage somewhere else because of the controls that need to be in place and the chain of custody issues we have with court. So the best practice is to keep it in our own facility. It doesn't require all that much space. And I think we can consolidate that by way of a renovation that would make it effective and it would maintain our chain of custody issues that we have.
If the building is redone, I know before when earlier in the year, part of the discussion was could the building be made larger and put the Board of Education in it as well? If you were to redo the building at the level you're talking about here, there is no additional space or no thought of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to plan that out. I haven't seen architectural plans yet for the interior. There may be some additional space if it's done effectively and all the inefficient areas are consolidated and made correct. But there wouldn't be enough room to bring the Board of Ed on board without a substantial addition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
John, I would make one other comment. The time to build a public building, which is a essential public building, is in a recession because the trade, we've been in a pretty heady building market for the past few years. And in a recession, the trades and the cost of a building come down significantly. Plus, we're in an unbelievably low interest rate environment, which, so those two things argue for probably doing a new building sooner rather than later, if we're in a recession.
And if we have liquidity.
Well, again, you're going to bond the police department over 20 years. It's a 50 to 100 year building. So normally, actually, the architects say normally you only get two renovations out of a building. So that's why it's quite costly to renovate a building that's 94 years old, which last time was renovated, it was mainly, you have the guts of the building this time that have to be addressed. So it's a very extensive renovation and also has the cost of moving out, operating outside of the building temporarily.
So remind me and the public at large, who is the planning agency for choosing between these four? Is it a police commission? Is it the police commission in concert with a specific building committee or the building committee that's working on all the other buildings? Who is, what committee is working on this problem?
We'll appoint a building committee when we finally target which direction we're going in.
Okay, so we haven't identified those people yet. So people don't have to worry that there's a committee and they just don't know about it. We haven't appointed that committee yet, but we will. And they'll work with the police commission, right?
Yeah, but we have, if we made a decision within 6 months, we still have another 6 months of planning before so construction is more than a year away anyway.
Okay, so the committee will be concerned only with the question of construction, not with choosing between options A, B, C, and D.
Well, I don't know yet. We'll, more than likely we'll know better after this Westcog study is done, and sometime later this year we'll form a building committee.
Okay.
Hey, John, it's Paul Foley. Kevin's right on the timeline here in that we want to hear from the final results from the Westcog, and then we'll come back to Kevin, in my mind, form a building committee, study all of these alternatives, and then come back with a plan. But what we need is a space holder for the next 2 years or 2 years out of the 6 million and 6 million, so that there aren't any surprises here on the capital budget.
But realistically, Paul, the chart that we created for you about the historical trend in debt, we normally will authorize a project and not really bond it for a year or 2 or 3 years later, because we largely use our general fund to advance capital projects. So the tension here is that we got an incredibly low interest rate environment. We put in the budget $10 million, 5 and 5, because it's going to be a 2-year project. But the bonding of it you could go either way. I mean, it's more than likely that low interest rates are going to encourage you to do it earlier.
That's correct. I think we're all on that same page. Correct.
Okay, if there's nothing further, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Paul Foley. Thanks, Kevin. Let's move on.
Hey, John, I have a couple more.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Not
Good.
related to the building, but just finishing out my capital.
Oh, okay, good.
So capital summary, 175750 is 3 vehicles and equipment, some taser replacements, mobile data replacement of 1. Certainly vehicles are critical to us, and they're officers' offices, and they need to be up to date and safe and capable. And the good news is that we found a very safe platform that's reliable in all weather conditions, and that's our Ford SUVs. And we're transitioning the Dodge Chargers out of our fleet, which were unreliable and expensive and not good in all weather conditions. The 3 vehicles is in line with our 5-year capital plan, and industry best practice is to replace 85,000, which is what we do. So you can see all those yellow highlighted vehicles are the ones that are coming up or due for replacement. And the bulk of our patrol fleet is in good shape, has lower mileage than that, and it's a pretty healthy fleet and stable. So that's the plan we need to continue on, which is 3-2-3-2 plan over the course of 5 years. And benchmarking, everybody also likes to ask us about how we compare to other agencies, and we're very conservative in what we do as far as vehicle replacement. And the good news is it works, and so we'd like to continue doing that, and that replacement schedule keeps our fleet very safe and stable. 3-2-3-2 plan over the course of 5 years. Now I'll talk about our operating budget. Overall decrease of 1.76%. Other agencies, 0.39, despite a 2.75% contractual wage increase. And how we did that is by forecasting out some probable vacancies in our salaries in our line, related to a couple of folks that are likely going to retire and take some time for us to replace. So what I did is I looked back for the past 10 years and determined the likelihood and how long folks might be retired or resign, and then it takes us to replace them. And that's how we came up with this salary offset line to try to meet the Board of Finance's guidance. And you can see we're very careful on how we build our budget, decreases and increases, exactly what we need, nothing more, nothing less, so that we can continue to provide the highest level of service to our town. And I think that's very obvious in the crisis we're in, that law enforcement, police, and EMS are critical in supporting our town and health and safety. Talk a little bit about staffing. 8 sworn members right now are eligible to retire. 1 just retired last month, and we're in the process of trying to hire someone to replace him. And our operating budget allows for the best staffing complement of 47 sworn. And as we've talked about many times over the years, long hiring and training timelines require us to fill the vacancies as soon as possible. Because of the competitiveness of the hiring environment in Connecticut, everyone is vying for the best candidates. And right now, we have 4 officers that are in field training. They're expected to graduate in May from our field training program, and then they'll be on their own. And 1 officer's at the police academy right now. Actually, he's back here because the police academy was evacuated due to the crisis we're in. And another officer, as I mentioned, retired back in February, and we're in the process of hiring someone to replace him. So right now we're operating with a deficiency of 6 officers, which I expect will be lightened up in May when these officers complete field training. And that's something, the complexity of our schedule and our staffing is very important for everybody to understand, and all the good work that our officers do. Now we'll talk about overtime. It's based on historical spending, and it's less than 11% of our aggregate salaries, whereas nationwide, many departments average 18%. So we're very conservative in that regard again. And our spending is in line with comparable police departments and town emergency services. So that's something everybody should recognize. That's a question I like to ask every year as we ask for our overtime line number. And you can look at how carefully we look back and look at historical spending and what we need. And going back to 2011 up to today's date. So we're asking for 535 for our FY21. We're forecasting right now about 532 for the existing fiscal year that we're in, given other contingencies that might happen that might cause that number to rise, given the crisis we're in. And that's our goal for overtime every year. And that's the system that you folks were kind enough to approve and pay for that allows us to carefully track and manage our staffing. And you could see that second item there, order in mandatory, is unusual. It's rare for us to see that number of order ins, and that's a direct result of our staffing deficiency that we're facing now. So kudos to our officers who continue to do great work every day despite all the staffing demands that we're having. And that's our request for FY21, 535. Forecast is 532, 104. And that's all I have for my presentation regarding our budget.
Since the last time you gave this presentation, you know, the world changed. And then I did hear you just say overtime based on the current situation that we're in. So could you have you given any thought to how the police mission is going to change given the current environment and the current crisis? Or maybe it's a long time to ask that question.
It's really early, and I think there's a lot of unknowns right now. We don't know how long this is going to last. Is it going to be 2 months, 3 months, 9 months? And it all depends on how that impacts our staffing. And we've been lucky so far. For example, we're going to have 4 officers that come on board in May. That's going to dramatically help with our staffing deficiencies. So that'll be a big help. But we just don't know what impacts we're going to see in the near future, whether our folks get affected by the coronavirus or other impacts we might see. We just don't know. And, you know, we'll continue to manage our budget conservatively in the way we're able to provide all the services we need to the town. And like I said, you know, I don't think I can say enough the great work that fire, police, and EMS are doing in this crisis, and the risks that they're taking going out there and dealing effectively with people and putting themselves in harm's way.
But that's the most likely result of is that the overtime budget will go up and dramatically if we lose any more officers. And what you're saying is that based on the current crisis, it's a possibility because they are the first line responders. So if we lose a couple of first line responders, we're going to have more mandatory order ins.
Yeah, a couple may not have quite an impact, but more than a couple, if there's 5, 6, 7, certainly that'll be impactful. And I think our EMS folks are feeling that right now, even though they're mostly volunteer, as our fire department. So I think all our emergency services are going to be impacted by this crisis. We're hoping the impact is insignificant, but you know, I think we're comparing the health and safety of our first responders versus dollars. And I think we always have to look at the health and safety of our people above all.
Absolutely. I'm just wondering which line is going to get affected, and it looks like that might be that you already have a personnel crunch. You don't have an equipment crunch. You have a personnel crunch.
That's true.
And it may get worse, and a lot worse, and it's an expensive problem to have.
Yeah, I think every police department and fire department and ambulance corps in the whole country is considering these possibilities. Sadly, we're not unique.
Raise your hand.
Yeah. Oh, John, sorry. I mean, this is the moment where there's a full audience full of some of the officers, and I just want the chief to know how much the town wants to thank the officers for this. It's been a tough year. I mean, when you look at that Doulos case and all that they've done, you know, and just as they're ready to take a breath, this thing hits. So just want to thank all of the officers for what they're doing, and you know, just let them know that the town is behind them 100%.
Thanks for that.
Okay, if there's nothing further, I think we have Chris Shipper is up next.
Thank you. Conservation Commission.
Checking. Yes, Conservation Commission, 20 minutes, Chris Shipper. And you
All right.
can, I think you're going to share your screen with us, or is that going to be, yep, here it comes.
Tiger's got it set for screen sharing.
Okay.
I think I'll start with this, that some of you may be familiar with the Conservation Commission and some not. We are legislated, and we were chartered, fully chartered in the course of 2016 and became effective 2017. In 2018, I got involved with the Conservation Commission, and in 2019, I became chair. For your understanding, the legislative authorization of the Conservation Commission is, this is the list of what we must perform. And I'm highlighting keep an index of all open spaces because that's a small budget item for us, along with another series of activities. And those open spaces include wetlands, streams, rivers, and ponds, and what have you. Tiger, if you scroll down, you'll see what we also are involved in, which is recommending plans and programs for the development and use of open space, coordinating activities of non-governmental bodies. Point 2 is somewhat indicative of the Bristow plan that we're involved in. Point 5 is indicative of supporting or being a supporting group for the sustainable CT exercise that was recently appointed and launched with Robin Bates Mason taking a strong lead. Point 7 points to watershed management and evaluation, where we get involved in river testing. Point 8 is acquire land and easements, and that speaks directly to the Land Acquisition Fund, which was passed by ordinance in 2018, received funding in 2019, but as of this budget has no funding in the plan for the upcoming fiscal year. That's a little unfortunate because open space acquisitions, if they were to come, require preparation. It's hard to do them in arrears. And then finally, just on point 12, supervise and manage municipally owned open space or park property when the agency normally delegates that power. That's how the Conservation Commission became responsible for Bristow Park. The first selectman requested that the Conservation Commission take oversight of Bristow Park, and that's how we come up to our Bristow Park master plan. Let me just mention that the Conservation Commission operating budget is $25,000 in total, and of that $25,000 in total, $10,000 is to support Sustainable Connecticut Initiative, $5,000 is for river testing, Silver Mine, 5 Mile, Norotan, and Rippewam. $1,500 is for the open space map update and prioritization, and then $7,000 is scheduled for Bristow Park Phase 2, soft cost landscape and engineering, and then just $1,500 in general items. It's a small budget, operating budget line item. Any questions about the Conservation Commission or its small operating budget?
No, keep going.
Okay. Tiger, let's shift over to the slide, and this is the, if you can get me to the beginning of this one. And I apologize, I'm learning how to use Zoom and put slides up. Just that opening picture, that's a picture of Bristow Pond yesterday. And with school at home, I would say, and under today's kind of social distancing, we're in an unusual situation where our playgrounds are closed, our ball fields are closed, our libraries closed, any place to congregate is closed, but our parks are open and very busy. A lot of visitation. People can visit and keep social distance. So in a very unintended, the law of unintended consequences, we're very fortunate to have Waveney and Irwin in the Nature Center and Bristow and Mead, as well as, I would say, the land trust properties for people to get out and just walk and breathe the fresh air. I had sent this information out. You all have it on your tablet. This is just the storyline that we've taken on responsibility for it. We have a 5-year master plan, and this master plan was developed with private funding from the Community Foundation, as well as a couple of local conservation-oriented foundations. So this is sort of a gift, and it's an indication that people are interested in seeing this kind of unique park rehabilitated. Scroll down. Bristow Park itself is the kind of the yin to the yang of Mead Park in the pond. It's where the pond drains out. It's crucial for stormwater resilience in the center of town. It's also a crucial link in the Green Link project, which would allow us to build walking links between our major parks up and down town. And that connectivity and walkability goal has been set out in the Plan of Conservation and has been unanimously supported by the P&Z Commission. Building really the biggest spend in our capital plan is to rehabilitate the central spine or trail that runs from Mead Park out to Old Stamford Road. We'll scroll down. But the survey work that was done revealed that this, as a bird and native plant park, was in near dereliction state. Fallen fences, clogged streams, silted ponds, trails, a lot of work needs to be done. And just a quick history, you've probably heard this. Bristow was acquired in 1924 by the New Canaan Bird Protective Society, which itself was founded in 1916. It represents the kernel of conservation in New Canaan nearly a century ago, and is one of our nation's oldest bird sanctuaries. It's something to be proud of. The other thing you must be aware of is that it was transferred to the town in 1934, and the deed says it shall be forever maintained as a sanctuary and wildwood or native plant preserve, and the public shall enjoy the free use of the property. The reports that I've seen and have been written by Yale, National Audubon, and Connecticut Audubon would argue that at this moment, the town of New Canaan is in breach of that contract. And as the Conservation Commission, this is our primary, one of our primary responsibilities. We take that very seriously. We think that this centennial master plan will address the breach and bring the town into compliance with the deed, and also give us something to celebrate, which is a pretty unique historical park, 100th anniversary in 2024. The funding master plan has a 5-year total spend of about $600,000. The town's portion, as it's currently set, is $500,000 over 5 years, and it's primarily on infrastructure: the perimeter or fencing, the paths, the viewing spaces, the ponds, and then some parking.
Town council meetings now by Zoom.
Oh, there you go. Good.
Good. Scroll down. That first $199,500 will cover rehabilitation of the central 1,600-foot trail. We'll continue to, and importantly, we're repairing that trail. And I think some of you may have experienced sort of like a high-end trail at Irwin Park, but the trail design is more like that which has been put in place at Waveney, and is proven to be, very well used. But we are trying to create it because it's in town to make it more senior and stroller friendly than what we currently have. Fencing repair is included in the budget because you can't maintain a bird and native plant park if you have deer and feral cats wandering through it. We'll add some signage and add a viewing area particularly focused for seniors Our hope is that Get About and, when we get through this crisis, Get About and Staying Put will be able to bring people to sit in near the pond. Finally, once the town undertakes this effort, we believe that there will be private support. And we believe that the way forward will be eventually to develop a private-public partnership to fund at least $100,000 and perhaps more, which would be organized under a Friends of Bristol Park umbrella. Much of the groundwork has been delayed, and if more private funds are forthcoming, it would reduce the future planned capital call in the town. This plan of rehabilitation has been reviewed with the general public, Board of Selectmen, DPW, Inland Wetlands, P&Z, Board of Finance, and Board of Selectmen. And this is a simple overview of the entire master plan. You can certainly scroll in or zoom in on any of these points as to what we're trying to accomplish. And then finally, below that is the full detail of the 5-year build-out plan. My sense is you've got a pretty well-developed plan. The first year is just under 200,000. If you do the main spine, you then can facilitate all the rest of the development. As it stands now, you can't get equipment easily into the park, and especially you can't get it in across the riverbed. So to do some of the trail work and other aspects, you need that central spine, that green link, to be put through.
Is this going to look like, so I've been doing a lot of walking in the woods this week, as a lot of people have in town. Is this going to feel more like the Waveney paths, or is this going to feel more like the Irwin path?
It's not going to be Flexipave. It's going to be more like the Waveney path, and part of it is going to make it more senior and stroller friendly. So it'll be, the best example would be the new Waveney path that went in behind the cornfields is an example of what it would probably come out to be, which is a good underfoot, but it's also permeable, and it should suit the environment pretty well.
And how long do these paths last? Do they last? Are they? I mean, we've gotten quite an education on FlexiPave. How long do they last?
Well, as they're currently put in place with a little bit of maintenance, and particularly if you watch out for areas of washout or build swales to prevent it, they should last about 20 to 25 years. Sometimes you may have to retop them with gravel, but they should last long. And there is the main spine is flat, fairly flat coming up to the pond, and the biggest challenge area is just the steep slope when you come past the pond and then across the river, that little intersection. There's a steep slope section that's going to get graded to improve the sustainability of the trail.
So I hate to steal Rich's thunder, but I want to understand whether I am taking on another project that needs to be maintained, which is one argument, or am I maintaining something that I already own and have neglected for far too long?
Yeah, I think that you can ask yourself, is this new spending or is it overdue spending? I don't believe that and again, experience will tell you we've done some pretty good work at building better trails throughout Waveney. We have some experience in other areas like the Land Trust. I think that this trail will be pretty sustainable. I don't think it'll be that hard. The biggest issue on maintenance will be keeping it 8 feet wide, which is occasionally walking through and trimming back the brush as it leans in. And that's a couple passes a year. That's normal park maintenance.
What happens if we approve the $200,000 this year and then situation changes and we don't approve any more? Will we have a useful park?
I think so, because you'll have the central spine completed. But I'd like to encourage you a little more than that, which is I believe that there are funding groups out there, including the Exchange Club, including the Community Foundation, but other foundations that will, and that I've spoken with off and on, to saying if the town comes in, we'll come in. So if you build the spine, those private funding bodies will help build all the spokes off of that trail. So you'll make progress. And I think if you get that main spine done, you will have dramatically improved this park for public visitation.
So this is the most important $200,000, after which private money flows and all the tributary trails flow.
This is how you take off. This is how you get this project. This is how you get the rehabilitation started. If the master plan, which has been, let's put it this way, gifted to you, is right, and we believe it is, having gone through it quite a bit, you get this done, and then you set in motion, the opportunity for a public-private partnership going forward. You set in motion visitation, and you set in motion, what you really do is you get public attention to this, and you get public visitation.
There's a lot of shiny new fence around this park. Who put that in?
That was put in primarily along the railroad side, really for a public safety reason, this past winter. And that basically covered the whole railroad length and a little bit down towards the bottom of the property. I'm trying to remember how many feet of fencing are in here, but that's clearly needs to be done. The next area of fencing that'll have to be done is along the Mead Park, particularly along the baseball field and by the playground. Need to make sure, we're not going to lose a child wandering into the swamp there or something like that. It's both protective barrier on both sides.
Chris?
Hey, Chris, one quick question.
Sure.
There's a couple of homes that border the backside of Bristow there. Some of those folks, and I'm not saying that currently live there, but in the past they've had gates that have gone into Bristow. And, when we looked at it and we were doing the ordinance and we were walking in there over the past couple of years, we noticed there was some debris that was being dumped in there. And I don't think it was old debris. Are there plans to keep those gates there or completely?
You point out that one neighbor actually built an invisible fence into Bristow Park, and it's certainly not what we want to have. And clearly, and we've experienced this in the land trust as well. Neighbors sometimes just think it's unused space, and so it's fine. But as you work the perimeter and as you take care of the property, they become more respectful of the property as well.
Can I ask a question?
Thanks. One more question while we have Tiger. Oh, sorry. I was going to ask Tiger about the sidewalk extension.
Oh, I was going to ask about the sidewalks too. Great minds, Steve.
Good. So is that part of the Green Link where you'd link up this park along 106 there? I'm sorry, along the, I guess it would link up all the way to Old Studio Road, I guess?
That's correct. There's a thought to come out of the entrance, or what you consider to be the main entrance to Bristow off of 106 Old Stanford Road, and then head down the road past that curve and then lead to Old Studio or Gower. There's a crossing at Gower and at Old Studio, which would then allow you to, from there, get onto a sidewalk to South School, come through South School, get to across the street to the high school in Waveney, and you've linked up everything at that point.
It's that big figure eight that would, you could get close to a half marathon in New Canaan if you set it up properly.
Got it.
There it is.
Right, so it links up everything from the nature center up on the right of your screen, all the way down to Waveney Park on the far left, and Mead Park and Bristow are right in the middle. So you have several options, but the option that we were talking about with the sidewalk is listed here, to come around to Gower and to come through South School. You can, at that point, come into Waveney through the top, or come around the high school and come through the other way. And then you're in Waveney proper.
And Tiger, I'm sorry, just to clarify, where would the sidewalk start, coming from the town end?
From the town end, it would start right at, we have right now, we have grant money to take care of all of Park Street as well.
Ah,
So
okay.
there's another way to come in from there. Then there's a short stretch from the end of Park Street to Bristow.
Right.
And then the thought is to come from Bristow down along Old Stanford Road to Gower. Old Studio is in back here to Gower. And then there's a crossing across 106 that we'll be able to take. There's a mid-block crossing there. And Gower has sidewalks there. And there's a crossing across Gower Road to get into South School. And from there, it's an easy hop into the high school, into Waveney.
So you weren't thinking of putting a sidewalk on that part between, along Park Street up to where you actually get to Bristow?
We are, well, there is sidewalk here already. We're just rehabilitating it with state money, a lot SIP grant. There's a small stretch that we would like to continue from here to here,
Right.
that we would like to continue. But it's subject to approval from the various boards.
Yeah, I think that'd be really popular with the folks that live over on that part of town.
Absolutely. The moment that we put this whole stretch in, or rehabilitate this whole stretch, hopefully that's either late in this year, if the grant money comes through now, or early next year. And then we can think at that time to extend that piece down along to get to Bristow and then further.
Yeah, I think it would certainly improve our perception as a walkable town to have that in effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the other thing, if you make Bristow what it could and should be, you want folks to enjoy it, and there's really no safe way to get in there. And when you think about it, you can go through Mead as a child. You can walk through Mead to get in there, but you can't go out on 106 and try to get in there. That's a dangerous walk.
Agreed. Bristow has always suffered from poor access, and we need to fix that.
Anyone else?
So there's not any budget right now to those sidewalks, is it, Tiger?
The
I'm
question
sorry.
is, do you have budget for those sidewalks now?
No, because the monies that were given for sidewalks were only for rehabilitation so far.
Okay.
Tiger,
And this is Sven. I personally like the walk through Bristow to get to Mead Park. And that's the backbone that Chris is talking about.
All right, Tiger, can residents ever donate towards a sidewalk should they want to? Is that allowed?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay, because I lived on that bend on Old Stanford Road for 14 years, and the neighbors, we would always say we would put money towards a sidewalk if we could.
Yeah, there's a neighbor now who lives right on the corner here, right in the worst spot.
Yeah.
And Chris, he's trying to gather up the rest of the residents to help. But certainly.
Yeah, I've heard that message too from other residents on that road.
All right. I just have to say, I lived next to Bristow for 14 years, and when we moved there 20 years ago, it was a beautiful park. The garden club used to take care of it, but it just kept on going. It was just too much for them, and it just kept on going downhill. So I think we need to bring it back to where it was. But I think the town has failed in its contract from the deed.
Chris, Rich, from your standpoint, you've got a great view into the land trust, into Waveney and into Bristow. And how would you rate this in priority relative to money being spent by the town right now in terms of increasing the value of our parks?
I would say, we, as I said at the beginning, we're in an unusual period where our parks have become a go-to place for many of the families around. That's a park near a pretty densely populated section of town. It's also very accessible from the schools for studies. I have to say, you know, Bristow has some real charm as a park. It's you know, having walked on over 400 acres of land trust land and been in Waveney, this is a park with a beautiful stream going through the center. It has a topographic interest. It has great trees. It has great bones. And I look at this more of a, if we can get this started and set up, I would hope that, you know, the town council and the first selectman might say, hey, we really need to get a long-term partner in here. For its first 70 years of existence, the partner was the Audubon and Bird Protective Society. And so there was always a visitation or a monitoring group that would go in and fix things and point out when there were problems and repair fences. That sort of faded out in the, as the Audubon Society kind of faded out as an organization. So we'll need to work on that. Right now, fortunately, there are several members of the Conservation Commission who are familiar with open space. That may not always be the case. And so a good long-term partner on this with a public-private partnership makes a lot of sense.
What is your current schedule for how soon you spend this $200,000 and get the park going?
To be honest with you, we'll be shovel ready June 1st or July 1st, because we're already, the plans are in place. And we're going through, we've been through P&Z, so we only have the Inland Wetlands Commission, which had been scheduled last week, but postponed to April. But once we get Inland Wetlands permission, we would go out to bid immediately on the main green link. And so our sense is we would be shovel ready, because that's the level of detail in this master plan. It's been laid out to occur over 5 years with the goal of making something very special by 2024. And that's the first big step.
Great.
Okay, if there's nothing further, is that the end of the presentation?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Any further, I mean, if you're going to vote against this, if you're going to have a problem with this, you owe it to Chris to raise your hand and tell him why. I hate to put a point on it, but this is the chance to talk about the Bristow Bird Sanctuary and the $200,000 budget. Okay, sounds like.
The only consideration is what we started off the whole meeting with is, as we're looking at the whole budget and the, current financial situation, what do we do as a whole? And so I said, this project as well as all of them, I think are, going to be subject for more in-depth conversations. So I'm not singling this out, it's just that this is the opportunity to, put that as a platform for what our discussion is going to be as we go through all of the, capital projects.
Fair enough. Agree. Okay. No further questions for Chris?
Not at all. Just in closing, Penny, I totally understand the challenges that you face. I felt the Conservation Commission felt it's their duty to present a good idea and a well thought out plan for you to evaluate and compare it to the other plans you have. This is laid out in great detail. You have all the information in your package, so there's plenty of room to look through it. But thank you for your time.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
John, can you just paraphrase Penny? It was a little muffled. I couldn't quite hear everything that you said.
Penny said she had no specific questions now, but certainly we're going to have a conversation at the end on the whole budget, and we're going to have to talk about, the priorities, and this among them.
Okay. Sorry, it was really muffled. I couldn't hear. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's Tiger is up next. Tiger?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening. We're actually kind of excited to be presenting or doing the first Zoom meeting, should say, of the town council. My commute home is literally 7 feet, I think, which is quite nice. So thank you very much. So we'll move through our presentation. We'll try to move as quickly as possible, given the fact that it's starting to get a little late in the evening. So our budget originally started off, when we went through the entire read, I had it at a -2. Then they did some adjustments at the Board of at the Finance Department for some salary items, and we wound up back at 186. I didn't feel that we had met the mandate, and since Kevin felt that that was important, and we are the largest department on the town side, I felt it was important for us to meet that mandate. So we were able to come forward and get that in one shot. We took a couple of monies, a couple of dollars out of engineering and a couple of dollars out of the teen center, and we were able to make the -2 mandate from the Board of Finance. I won't say comfortably, but comfortably. I can run through each department, but I decided to add one slide that wasn't in the Board of Finance prior, just to give a breakdown of our budget and where it kind of sits out there. And the interesting thing to note between salaries, utilities for our town buildings and the town in general, and contracts that we have for garbage hauling and recycling and things of that nature that are mandated, we're at 77% of our budget before we even got into things that you might consider to be somewhat discretionary. But at that point in time, you know, tree service takes up a large chunk, road maintenance takes up a large chunk, and by the time you whittle it down, we're only down to less than about $100,000 of what you might consider discretionary at that point in time. So it's while it seems like it might not be tight, it is rather quite tight. I know that our salary line doesn't match sometimes at the police and fire, but it is 57% of our budget going forward. We were able to meet our mandate given the fact that our contractual obligations were a little bit less than the police, but still over 2% for our unions, and we were still able to meet the -2% mandate by the Board of Finance. So going forward into each department, I don't know if you want to talk about each department, John, or if you want me to zoom forward to specific departments you want to speak on.
I think you could just zoom forward. We have seen this presentation before.
Right, I'm aware. I know that there were a couple of questions on, say, the transfer station. We could certainly go to the transfer station if you'd like to talk about that first.
Wherever you want to be. Yep.
It's fine. We can scroll forward to the transfer station. The transfer station itself sits at a -2.69 or a -43% overall. The way we were able to do that was that we had to have a reduction in staff from 5 down to 4. That's a supervisor and 3 employees. There has been over time, if we look at our transfer station budget over time, we have been bleeding cash out of it since fiscal 10, or actually even before that, from fiscal 7, 8, when the first crash occurred. We had been taking monies out of the transfer station down to basically its low at fiscal 15. And then at that point in time, it started to increase slightly in that. If we look at our tipping fees, what it was costing us, it basically falls in line. As our tipping fees increased, the money that we had to pay out the door, so did our budget. And then we were able to take a little bit of dip in fiscal 19, and then that fiscal 19 to 20 shows a big jump, and that's where we hit the $160,000 change in recycling. And then this past year, you look this slight dip again to $1,572,000, where the budget stands now. If I take the $160,000 out from the recycling, I will be below our highest point, or our lowest point, I should say, in fiscal 15. And would be at 1412 without that recycling blip. To to give you a look, over that time frame that we were talking about, the increases in the transfer station, it was strictly due to the tipping fee increases from $72.14 to $88.20, where we stand now, and it continues to be going forward in the next 4 years through our contract. We have a contract for the next 5 years for tipping fees. And they're slated to go up a couple of percentage points each year. If we look at overall where we stand, and one of the reasons why we reduce staff is the fact that our recycling, the bottom line there, is pretty much held standard from fiscal 12 all the way through to 19. The quantities have held pretty much standard, around 1,500 tons a year. But our MSW, our municipal solid waste, has gone down, so we're receiving less garbage. So there's not as much maneuverability and not as much work for the men to do. So therefore, reduction in staff we felt was warranted at this time. Be able to reduce from the 4 down to the 3. The 3 gets down to almost a minimal staffing. At that point in time, there's not much more we can do. Right now, I'm having to, on off days when the men are on vacation or out sick, I'm having to take a person from the highway department or the parks department to actually augment to keep that minimum staffing level. I don't know if you have any questions on recycling or the transfer station as we stand, or you'd like me to go forward.
I've got a question on recycling, John, if I could.
Sure.
If I could. I'd just like to, Tiger, for you to go a little deeper into it. I'm old enough that we used to separate stuff and it actually got recycled. And now we just throw it in the dumpster and it never gets recycled, apparently. Is there anything we can do that would actually improve the recycling from a salability of the recyclable material standpoint?
Our recycling is actually quite clean. Our materials, but it's when it hits the MRF, that it's combined with everybody else, and not everyone else's is clean. That's the problem that we have. Ours is quite clean, from what we've heard from our haulers and from the MRF itself. But the problem that we have is it's commingled, and China's not taking it anymore. That's our biggest problem. We can certainly try to drive up, but we've done certain things as far as education and outreach with the population, with Planet New Canaan and others, to try to educate the populace on what they can do and how they can help us. We are looking at other options of trying to reduce the amount of materials that are coming in. We're going to start a curbside composting situation whereby food waste will be composted separately and then delivered to this company, Curbside Composting, and they're actually going to make compost out of it. We're trying other ways to do it. We've added some additional ways to recycle or repurpose linens and other clothing and things like that might have wound up in the municipal solid waste bin, things of that nature. But the nature of the beast is that the global market has changed, and it's not going to get better anytime soon.
You want to talk about glass?
Can talk about glass a little bit. Right now, Connecticut is a single stream, so glass goes in. We are looking at the possibility of taking glass back out again, but that's a whole nother situation of trying to educate the population as to what they need to do with the glass. The problem is that, glass goes in, glass breaks, and glass contaminates what's there. But we haven't gotten any mandated direction from DEP as to actually taking glass out. We are going to go look at that as a possibility. There are other municipalities that are doing it. There might be some other avenues for us to be able to sell that material, or at least offload it at no cost. Some people were trying to make concrete out of it or use it for concrete. Way back when they used to use it for asphalt. They stopped that because of the shine back from the lights that were on the glass particles inside the pavement. But there are other avenues that we will be exploring to see if we can't reduce that number down, because now we're not getting any money for recycling. It's actually costing us money going out the door. At some point in time, the curves are going to go past each other, and it's actually going to be cheaper than it is actually for some municipalities throughout the country to actually just dispose of your recycling instead of recycling it. That's an unfortunate occurrence.
Hey, Tiger, has there been any more talk about the swap shop?
There is. We went to Darien. We looked at it. The problem that we have is space. Our biggest concern is we're not set up like Darien is set up. Darien has a nice scale house, right at the front where they can basically direct people where they got to go, and they've got a lot of room to move. Their incinerator, the area of their swap shop is actually built where their incinerator was. The unfortunate thing is our incinerator sits on top of our highway department, and we use our tipping floor of the incinerator as our salt shed. So we lost our salt shed during the land swap back 10, 15 years ago. We had a beautiful salt shed, a salt dome at that point in time. We've had to make do with what we have now. So if there's a way to actually shift and give us a salt barn back, we were thinking we could use that entire tipping floor area as a recycling area or as a swap shop. That's our main problem. We can't build anything per se on the landfill itself since it's capped. So we're limited in space of where we are right now. But we are looking at options as to what we might be able to accomplish going forward with swap shop.
How much would that cost, that salt shed?
It's $500,000.
Tiger, can I go back to the discussion that the subcommittees of both the Board of Finance and the Town Council had with regard to staffing in the transfer station? And it was in and then it was out and all that sort of stuff. There's probably nothing we can do about it now, but I hope you're comfortable with the statement that as you operate this manpower number, if indeed it is problematic and doesn't work, that you'll feel comfortable going back and requesting additional funds?
Yes, the discussion, as you remember, we kind of bandied it back and forth. What's the best thing to do? Keep it in the budget, not fill it, take it out of the budget, possibly come back if there's a problem, or if we see a problem, or there's an uptick in usage at the facility. So yes, if we see that we took too deep of a cut, we'll come back. It's kind of counter to what we've been told for the past 20 years, but I think we can do it. I think we'll come back and ask if we actually have to, and then we can come back to what would be at that point in time our full complement of 57 employees. Leon's presentation was fantastic, but he's actually still third. I'm second to the Board of Ed. Yeah.
Okay. All right, that was the understanding coming out of the Board of Finance discussions, and we don't want to be overstressing you, but to make it a realistic manpower usage and number for your department.
No, we thank you, and if it turns out that we cut too deep, then we certainly will. We'll come back to take another slice at the apple or another look at it.
Okay, fair enough.
Tiger, just a quick, it's a simple question, but do you think our fees are keeping up with the increasing cost of disposal and recycling generally?
That's a great question. I appreciate that, because we are looking at adding some fees or changing our fees somewhat. If you looked prior, basically our tipping fee, what we charge the garbage haulers, was basically in line with what our cost was to have it leave the facility. So we were charging basically what we were being charged to leave. So it was kind of a net of zero. But that doesn't cover our overhead for men to man the station and actually to run the station itself. So this year we were proposing a $5 increase in the tipping fee, and that would actually bring us up a little bit above our peers, but more in line. Right now we're at $90 a ton. We want to go to $95 a ton. Darienne's at 94, Wilton's at 93, Ridgefield's at 93.75. So we're kind of in keeping with everyone around us, and that would see a slight uptick in additional revenue of around $19,000 if we took the same amount of material in as we're taking in at present. The other thing that we are looking at, which I think is more important, would be a change in the residential fee, the permit fee, from the $45 now that it stands at to $75. We've been at 45 since 2015. This has gone back and forth since its inception. It actually was taken out at one point in time, then reinstated. But if you look at our neighbors, Ridgefield's on basically a $5 per pound with a $5 minimum. Darien-Ann's at $125 and Wilton's at $4.50 a bag. So you come in at $4.50 a bag to throw. So we are looking to try to get more in line with our neighbors, and then also with our costs. An average household dumps 1.5 tons of garbage. It's costing us $90 out the door. That's $135 to the town, and we're only charging the people $45 for it. So this 75, well, it doesn't go the entire way. It starts to get us closer without hitting the residents too hard. The only caveat would be that we would keep, if you had a private hauler already, we would keep the fee at $45 for you to use the facility for other things. And the thought is also for senior citizens that might stay at $45 as well, but that'll be a Board of Selectmen decision.
Yeah, so I guess the answer to my question is no, we're not keeping up.
Well, we are and we're not. You know, we're standard with what we're paying out the door, but the feeling is that it's not covering our overhead to actually man the facility. So we should kind of charge a little bit more than what we're being charged.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Tiger, quick question. After 2008, were more people using the transfer station rather than private haulers for a while?
Slightly, yes. You know, because of the recession, yeah. There was a slight uptick there, but not as many as you would think.
And activity has been way down this week at the transfer station. Did I hear that correctly?
No, activity's actually increased since everybody is home. A lot of home improvements are happening. A lot of yard cleanup, a lot of brush cleanup are happening. So we're getting a lot of that visitation to the transfer station. So there's been a slight uptick in CD and brush disposal from, you know, people need something to do, so they're out working in their yards or they're working around their homes. So there's been a slight uptick in the town itself. There's virtually no garbage. So as our highway department goes around to pick up garbage throughout town, there isn't that much since there isn't that many people in the downtown area. So that portion of the garbage has actually been down quite substantial, or substantially, I should say.
So much for work at home.
Correct.
In the yard work.
Anything else on the transfer station, John?
No.
All right. The parks maintenance was at minus 2.4%. There's not much to say. We did decrease one of our mosquito control. We typically go out for mosquito control 3 times a year. We added a 4th application for EEE. We took that one back out again because we don't know exactly how the year is going to go. If it turns out to be a bad year, we will do that additional treatment. But we took it out in the interim. We also reduced some of our work from our outside contractors and outside grass treatments. The outside contractors for 17.5, that's the mulching that we were doing at some of the facilities. So we are stopping the weeding and the spring cleaning and the mulching at the powerhouse and the carriage barn, as well as Vine Cottage. And then we're reducing our summer work or our secondary application at Saks itself. The high school will get the full complement of work. But given the fact that Vine Cottage is empty and we're hoping for some help and some assistance from the people at the carriage barn and the powerhouse, we reduced that work. But it was we didn't want to see it go, but at the same time, sometimes you have to make cuts. Excuse me. And then we reduced $2,500 from our parks and trails, and that basically was the difference between the material cost of what the Conservancy has been speccing on their trails and what we were using. So we're going back to the original material for some of the trails that haven't been treated or haven't been upgraded in the past. I don't know if there's, the Nature Center is strictly all utilities, their increase. The town utilities itself, this is basically what we pay for excuse me, our sewer use fee, our lighting throughout town, and then our hydrant fee to Aquarian itself. We assumed a 3% increase in the hydrant service for $5,000, and then we actually saw our decrease in our lighting throughout town because we have approximately 50% of our street lights now are LED, and we're hoping that Eversource will come through and fix the rest of them or replace the rest of them. So we saw a $28,000 change in that, and we should see another commensurate change in that if they are able to fix or replace the other 50%. We have 408 of them in town, 200 have been done so far in the high use areas, and as they go forward and replace them, we're replacing all with LEDs. There isn't much else on any department of note. I can go straight to capital if you would like.
Yeah, let's go right to capital. You're doing a great job on operations. I think, you're a wizard when it comes to finding, squeezing efficiency out of your operating budget.
I don't think I would say that I'm a wizard. I think that I think they'd use a different term, but it's fine. The our capital request was 8.2 million, split over the various departments. I'll go straight into engineering. It sits at $5.7 million is the overall request. $4 million is what will be funded through the town. We do have projects and some grants coming in. So we have a project at the West Road Bridge. The construction of it is estimated at $2 million, 50-50 split with the DOT. So we're looking at $1 million coming back for that project. Excuse me. And then the Bonus Ridge Bridge, the engineering phase needs to be undertaken since that bridge was recently downgraded due to new requirements by the DOT as far as how they rate bridges. But that, thankfully, that entire engineering fee will be taken up by the DOT. And then moving forward, when we get to the bridge construction itself, it'll be an 80-20 split, 80% paid by the federal government and the states and 20% paid by the town. So that'll be actually some welcome dollars coming forward. And then we have about $400,000 in grants, our local town aid road grant, and then our LOSIP grant take up a portion of the monies for the pavement management program. We do have $300,000 slated for parking lot improvements, $300,000 for sidewalk improvements, and then our standard 50 for drainage, 50 for guide rail. This is about the last year or the second to last year for guide rail replacement. We're almost through everything in town. We have $25,000 for signage replacement. That's an ongoing thing through the FHWA, whereby every sign in town has to be replaced every 7 years. We do have a new line item in for some security upgrades for $50,000. We have hired a consultant to help us take a look at all of our vulnerable areas. And we have monies in the budget for this year and coming years to attack some of those areas, given the concerns that were brought to light through the unfortunate Doulos case. So we're waiting for the consultant to come back, and we'll go out to bid with those items and then put cameras up. Our first go will be in some of our parks. I don't know if you have any questions on each one of the items.
The sidewalk improvements, last year we asked that we spent some time talking about, are they improvements or are they extensions? And they're labeled improvements. Does that mean we're not extending or does that include both?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I'd actually like to discuss that a little bit because the amount of requests that are coming in for sidewalk extensions, we just discussed one at Bristow, going forward from Bristow out the door and around from Old Stamford Road down to Old Studio Road or Gower Road. At present, I wouldn't be able to spend money on that because that would be an extension. I did try to get Eversource to put in their gas line through that entire grass area and stay off the state road. And short-sightedly, they just couldn't get past themselves and do it because I said, put the gas line in the grass area and then give me a sidewalk on top of it. You're going to save probably 50%, 75% on the dollar to do that. And they just couldn't get through the planning phase. I do have one stretch of sidewalk on South Avenue from Surrey Road up to Waveney entrance that we've wanted to do in the past. We met out with Eversource right before this outbreak, where they're looking at putting the gas line in the shoulder and then actually building the sidewalk for us, but they can stay out of the state road, especially considering that that entire stretch doesn't serve any homes, and they're trying to get to the church, who actually would benefit from them putting the pipe in the ground and then building a sidewalk for us. So we are trying other ways to partner with other people to try to help us extend our sidewalk network. But the requests are continuing to mount for other areas, and then the pressure is actually continuing to, or mounting further for the areas already that are on our list but have been static. Where we plan to work right now with the $300,000 is basically in the Park Street area, the Cherry Street, Main Street, and Park Street areas. Cherry Street, mainly across the street from the library. And then if you were heading that way, if you're heading from South Avenue across the street from the library, doing that stretch along Morse Court, and then taking a left and mirroring Morse Court again. Morse Court would be on your left-hand side the entire way, so that entire stretch of sidewalk would be redone. The unfortunate thing is that that's along a state right-of-way, so it's underneath state requirements, so the cost drives up slightly for curbing installation and work thereof. And then we're looking at the one extension. I won't really call it an extension, it's really a fill-in, and that was allowed during last year's discussion, was on Park Street from the Merritt Parkway, the Merritt Apartments to Maple Street. So that stretch of sidewalk we would like to fill in. I spoke to Arnold Karp and Paul Stone, and they're going to be redoing some of the sidewalk on Maple Street as part of their construction, and that will tie in with this piece down at the lower end of Maple. As far as sidewalks go, we did get our street scan data back for our sidewalks, and our sidewalks, this is what the look of our sidewalks are right now. The average condition, or the SCI, I guess you would call it, is a 61, which is well below our standard. We were at high 60s, low 70s, around a 70 when we first looked at it. But for a couple of years, the amount of monies that we needed to kind of stay current, the budget was cut. So now our condition is around a 61. As you can see, a quarter of them are in excellent condition, 16% are in good, and we come all the way down to what we consider 0.6% are failed, or in serious condition. About 8% are failed or in serious condition. Those are the ones that are around the Brinkerhoff, Mortimer area. The very poor sections are in the Fieldcrest and Village Drive areas. Those hopefully will be taken care of when we pave the roads. We can't pave those roads until all the all the service lines are in. For Eversource Gas, we're asking for them to expedite that as quickly as possible. I'm hoping that it'll be completed this year, but I'm not confident that they'll be able to do that. But the moratorium on the road ends at the end of this year, so we can come back in and pave it next year. And when we go to do that, we'll be looking at taking care of all the sidewalks at that time in that area. So that should take care of a good portion of the bottom half of that graph, or this chart.
And I'll say what I've said every year. We got to get to the Brinkerhoff Road area. I mean, the sidewalk is completely failed. It's safer to walk in the road, and the trail is rougher than Bristow.
I would agree, Sven. It's been on our list. We've wanted to do it. The unfortunate thing is that Eversource came in on the year that we were actually going to do it. And then now we were forced to wait for 3 years. I asked Eversource for a list of people specifically on those streets and on Fieldcrest and Village. I've asked for them to reach out with their with their sales force to try to give the people one last go at connecting to the gas. At that point in time, getting them to say, no, we don't want gas, but they can sign off so I can actually go in and take care of that work. But I don't want to go in there and start working on it if they're still going to be putting service laterals in.
Thank you.
It's the unfortunate occurrence.
So everything that you've shown us is all repair, right? There's really no new stuff in this, no new sidewalks.
There's nothing new. The only thing that I mentioned was the Park Street one, but that's really a fill-in. It's not really it's not an extension by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a fill. We do have, as I mentioned prior, we actually have 3 locations whereby the state's going to grant us money. The entire length of Park Street, that actually includes an extension of sidewalk in front of the churches to get to Route 124 by the Historical Society, which will then tie in the Green Link through the upper area there. As you come down from the Nature Center along the churches and across from the Historical Society, there'll be a crosswalk across to a sidewalk along God's Acre, down Park Street, and basically Park Street will be all rehabilitated on state money. We're also looking at having a sidewalk installed on Richmond Hill with that LOTSIP money as well, from Mead Park up to Marshall Ridge. And lastly, we'll be on Talmadge Hill from the upper tiered parking lots all the way down to 106. The Board of Selectmen just approved the design contract last week for that work. So those three stretches, somewhere on the order of $2 million worth of sidewalk work, will be paid for by the state of Connecticut.
And so those are in the plan to do then?
Those are in the plans to do them. That's correct.
And the one up Richmond Hill stops at Marshall Ridge. It doesn't go all the way to Lee?
At present, it stops at Marshall Ridge. That's correct.
That's too bad.
Well, the thought is if we can certainly extend it after if there's some use, and then at that point, you really need to just connect the 2 loops between Elm Street and Upper Richmond Hill, whereby going along Weed Street for probably about 4 houses or so.
Right.
But yeah, if you're gonna go up from Marshall Ridge up Richmond Hill to the end to the intersection, you might as well take the right and then complete the loop.
Yeah,
at least we can tie into more houses being directly tied into Irwin Park and the Green Link itself at that point.
Yeah, at least right now when you take the right, you can walk on grass and not walk on the road, but in Richmond Hill, you're walking on the road.
That's correct.
Right.
Hey, Tiger, is there any chance of getting state money on 106 there over to Bristow?
The state actually, while it's in their right of way and you have to follow their regulations and their requirements, they actually don't acknowledge the fact that there's a sidewalk there. So it will be completely town maintained and town installed, town paid for, and town maintained. It's an interesting arrangement that the state has inside their right of way for sidewalks. So all the sidewalks on South Avenue, while they're there and they're inside their right of way, they're our responsibility. They're not the state's. So that would be the exact same thing. And the unfortunate thing is that gets a little bit further outside the circle from our plan of conservation and development, as far as our area of influence around the downtown area and around the train stations. It's a little bit outside that, so it wouldn't necessarily fall underneath what money we're using now, which is the local transportation capital improvement program, the LOTSIP program. We're able to use that because of the T in transportation. We're able to get people to the train station, to a hub. It gets a little bit too far out at that point in time.
Tiger, from a safety perspective, you can't say enough about the extensions you've done on Grove Street and the extension on Weed to Irwin. I mean, every day I drive through that area and there are strollers and people walking, especially right now, obviously with everybody, sort of cooped up. It's amazing how many people are out walking right now. It's remarkable. And because of these sidewalks, they're able to do it safely. So thank you for, everything you've done to get us to this point, because I can't imagine, not having that walkability. It's really made a big, big difference.
No, thank you. I think yes, I would agree. It's been it's a nice adjunct. You know, each one of the 3 extensions that we did, or the fill-ins on Grove and then over at Mead Street and Upper Richmond Hill, I think were definitely warranted and at this time shown to be worthy. I got an email last night thanking me for putting in the trail system or extending the trail system or finishing it at Irwin, and then the trail work at Waveney, because the amount of people that were out in Irwin and at Waveney walking the trails was astronomical. There was actually to the point where you were worried about having them too close together.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's unbelievable.
John, anything else on admin or?
Keep going.
Okay. The town buildings, our request originally was at 2.9 million. The Board of Ed changed, the Board of Finance changed over some of the monies from the Board of Ed to our capital account for some microgrid work, some CHP units to be installed. But the bulk of the money's slated here for phase 2 of the Waveney House upgrades at $1.8 million. Phase 1 was the toilets that have been designed. The entire project is out to bid. At present, we're waiting for, we gave them a bid extension because of the outbreak right now. A lot of the contractors were asking for some additional time to be able to speak to their suppliers as to what supply chains would look like and things of that nature. So phase 1 is fully funded. Phase 2 would be our elevator construction and some additional work. And then phase 3 in late summer of 2021 would be the walkway coming in on the western side of Waveney, and then some work on the loge in the back. And then we actually have to upgrade the fire escape as well as part of this work. That was not considered. The loge work and the fire escape were definitely not considered in the initial phasing. But then when the committee got together and then the fire marshal reviewed what was happening at Waveney, those became apparent. The loge work was strictly ADA work, and the fire escape was warranted or necessary. We also have $231,000 for the Playhouse movie theater. This was deferred from last year. It was $225,000 last year. It's $231,000 this year. We have $165,000 for the NICVAC. I believe that that's been deferred, waiting for some work at the police department, but I think that was deferred by the Board of Finance. We have $125,000 for engineering for the HVA system at Waveney. As Leon mentioned in his presentation, the boiler at Lapham failed earlier than expected, much earlier than expected. There was a design flaw in that boiler, in that model, and it failed. And we were then forced to scramble to bring in a new one or bring in a temporary one, hook that up, and then design a new system underneath it while we're actually renting a boiler. It was the first selectman's decision to have us go out and do the engineering for Waveney itself, since that boiler, if it fails or the heating system fails, we could be looking at taking that building out of service for a year. So we want to have the engineering in place, know exactly what we need to do, and then be ahead of the curve before there's a problem, before a problem occurs at Waveney, similar to what happened at Lapham. And we have $100,000 in our oil to gas conversions for various town facilities. We have gas going to the schoolhouse apartments, the daycare. We have it ready to go to the police department. If we're able to make the separation at the EMS, our goal is to have that heated with gas as well. And then we have gas at our parks garage off of Farm Road, and we'll be looking at bringing gas to the town hall and other facilities if we can. We have a look to try to bring it up into Waveney to power the pool, Lapham Center, and the paddle hut as well. We've been working with Eversource Gas on a route that might bring us through the woods off of 106 up the hill onto the pool road to do that. And we have about another 15 separate areas on the facility dude report. Each one of these things, I know there was a question on the facility dude report as far as we are working with it. And it's actually helping us budget and plan as we go forward. So the the capital plan that you see in front of you, that large, long capital plan, strictly comes from the facility due report. Then it's vetted as to whether or not it's needed or necessary at the time that it comes off the rolls from the report, and it's either deferred or brought forward accordingly. So each one of the items listed is looked at individually and vetted whether or not it should stay or can be deferred at that point. So everything you see on the list is what we feel needs to come forward at this time. I don't know if there's any questions on the town buildings.
I do. This is Christina. I wanted to ask you, how much money was approved in prior years for the Waveney House ADA?
$1 million.
How much?
1 million.
Okay, and wasn't that part of the elevator? Why is it showing up on this 1.8?
Well, because the elevator is going to be, the problem is phasing. The elevator, part of this money is going to, goes towards the elevator because we've got to order it, and then it's going to take 8 months to build and then come forward. So the committee's thought was to bring the toilets forward, the bathroom facilities forward, take care of that, and then have the elevator second. Just due to phasing. There's some design elements that have to go into that. Shop drawings have to be created. There's a lot of back and forth on that. So there's a long lead time on the elevator itself. So it couldn't be instituted first. And that was the committee's decision to go forward with the bathroom installation now and then do the elevator construction second. The entire phasing of all three phases is out to bid right now. So we'll have a little bit harder numbers coming forward soon. And the thought is that we get one contractor in knowing the construction schedule and knowing the phasing requirements and knowing the funding requirements, and we can go forward from there.
So what was included in the 1 million that we approved? Wasn't it the ramps and the bathroom and the elevator? And we were sure they would come in for that amount?
We weren't sure that they were going to come in for that amount, and the scope has dramatically changed from what was originally anticipated through the committee. So the loge work is new. The work on the fire escape is new. The walkway to enter by what used to be the Lions ramp is completely different from what was originally anticipated. Even the elevator design is somewhat different. And then trying in keeping with SHPO and the State Historic Preservation, that work on the bathroom substantially changed as well. So the scope definitely increased from what was originally envisioned for the project. And that was all vetted through the committee and vetted and approved through the committee.
Not the monies, but the work, correct? So do you see any part that can be put off?
No, the law is 20 plus years old. It's 1991.
So if we didn't do this phase or didn't improve this, then we would just close the building down.
If that's what you desire, yeah, I think that would be a mistake. But right now, the building is non-compliant. We know the building is non-compliant. It's a wedding facility.
And we don't have a use yet for the building, correct?
Well, it has a substantial use right now as offices for our recreation department and as a wedding venue and a venue for multiple nonprofits and other people that want to utilize the facility.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll pipe up. I mean, it's not just Christina Christina is voicing this, but I'm hearing it from a great number of people around town, Board of Finance members, town council members. They're saying that this, number one, is not well understood. We don't understand what's changed with the scope of work. We don't understand why it's gone from $1 million to $1.8 million. We are nervous after the last couple weeks that we don't have sufficient reserves. And if we can hit the pause button on a major project and pause it for a year, then we might do so. And we're wondering, what is the risk of putting this on pause for a year? We may not be able to rent this to brides. We may not be able to have the public in Waveney House at all. I think we understand those risks, but given the events of the last couple weeks, we're looking at at deferring $1.83 million of spending into the future. And it's not just Christina's idea. I'm hearing it from all sides. So this is the time to talk about that now and tell us why that's a very bad idea, why it's going to cost us more money later, why this is the most efficient elevator and bathroom design. We thought we had agonized over spending $1 million on an elevator and ADA compliance a year ago, and now it's $1.8 million. And that committee has not explained to us what changed. We don't even know who's on the committee.
If I may, John, I'm sorry, Tiger. This 1.8 million is in addition to the 1 million that we previously approved.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's gone from 1 to 2.8.
Yeah.
Like I said, the scope is dramatically changed from what was originally envisioned through the entire design process. The committee was, well, I think it was well represented. There were 2 members of the council on it. 1 member of the Board of Finance, a couple of historic preservationists, Park and Rec chair at the time, and then some ex officio members from the departments, recreation, parks, DPW, buildings, things of that nature. I thought that everyone was well understood as to what was happening at the building and what was being done. To hit the pause button, you might as well hit the pause button on all of it, you know, and it would be unfortunate. I think you'd have to, you run the risk at this point in time of just closing the building, because at some point in time, somebody's going to come forward. We've already had somebody come forward about handicap spaces in Locust Lot. Now, we have a multi-million-dollar building that is not compliant, and the law is 30 years ago at this point in time. So the thought being is that, you know, we need to go forward with this. If you want to keep building, want to keep Waveney as a viable building for the public to come in, people are utilizing the parks every day. So the fact that they're going to want to go in the building, and they're going to want to go in the building. This unfortunate occurrence with the coronavirus will hopefully be over in 2 to 4 months. At that point in time, we haven't even broken ground on any of the work that we want to do in there here. You know, late spring for the toilets, I would imagine that we'll probably be a little bit further along than at that point in time. Probably be delayed until midsummer, if not further. As Kevin mentioned, you don't have to bond or fund the money at present. We just have to have authorization to actually go and utilize the money. You don't actually have to fund it.
You know, plus the fact that, John, can I speak, John? Am I on?
You're on.
So you have a building here that we put a $2 million roof on to seal the building. It is a $20 to $25 million building, and we've had it for 50 years. We didn't, you know, and to have another 50 to 100 years out of this building, you have to, this law has been on the books for, and we have sort of had a pass by the federal government for the first 20 years, but you don't get a pass anymore for ADA compliance on public buildings. Public buildings have the highest standard for ADA compliance. And this is a major building that, you know, we get a lot of use out of as a venue for all sorts of activities. So
nobody is denying that we have got to make the building ADA compliant to use the building.
But pausing a year doesn't do anything, because you're going to amortize that 1.8 million over 20 years. So it's 180 grand a year. We pay $1 million a year still to buy Irwin Park. You know, these things, when they're long-term assets, you have to, there's no benefit in deferring it. It's where, and you're on the risk of getting sued by the federal government. You know, they're suing that Brooklyn Library for not properly building it. It's a real risk. And Tiger, unfortunately, has an obligation, and I have an obligation to bring forward ADA compliance projects.
Is there any way we can just get more clarity into why it's suddenly 1.8? I mean, I understand, I was at the same meetings Christina was at, and, you know, we belabored it and finally understood the 1 million. And this is really now recently the first time I've seen that here's another 1.8 million that's popped up. And maybe it's unavoidable, but I don't think it would hurt to have the rest of us better understand why we had such big scope creep. I'm a project manager. I don't like scope creep.
Well, this is all ADA compliance. And Penny was on the committee as well. I think the members of that committee understood that once you get into ADA compliance, you have to essentially look at it this way too. That building has like 12 bathrooms, right? We're making a central place for a bathroom for a public building. So we're never going to renovate the rest of those bathrooms because they're not going to be utilized. And so, once this work is done, the roof having been done, the kitchen is essentially modern, has been upgraded a couple of times since we've owned it 50 years. The building is essentially modernized. Anything we do going forward is cosmetic to preserve the character of the building.
But we don't still have a use for it.
Well, you can have that point of view, Christine. The fact of the matter is it's used weekly and as a venue for, we do six, I think Steve's still on, we do 60 weddings a year. We should be charging more for the weddings because we ought to be able to, when we get the last remaining project, if we decide ever to do it and the HVAC, the heating system does go eventually, I don't think the heating system is going to go for the next 10 years, but it is at risk of failing because it's an old system that's built into concrete. But the option really here is at some point to close the building down if you don't think it's a value proposition. But it's a $25 million building, and over 50 years, over 100 years, you have to do this kind of work.
I agree with what you're saying, Kevin, but it's on top of the police station and other major works that are coming in front of us.
I know, I recognize that. I'm just saying it's, sometimes some things you don't have a choice. Have we, the decision at this point, maybe it was 5 years ago, do you want to just tear the building down? But you're already into this, maintaining this building. It's a fabulous building. I don't think anybody would vote to tear it down. So it's not scope creep in the sense that people wanted to do extra things. ADA compliance is an expensive thing. Elevators are an expensive thing. And everybody, all the experts who worked on it couldn't figure out a cheaper way to do ADA compliance.
Then maybe we have to revisit the
$1 a year ago, and now it's up to another 1.8 on top of the original million.
I have a tough time with that too. I echo what Liz says. When you said, is it worth $1 million to be able to make use of the second floor? We said yes. But nobody bothered to ask us, is it worth $2.8 million to make use of the second floor?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we need to rethink the whole thing. And that's why people are saying, how are we using the second floor?
John, since I served on this committee, I would say that it was not just a choice to use the second floor. It was the only way to make the building's bathrooms ADA compliant because there is no room on the main floor to add those bathrooms without, say, going into the library or tearing walls down, and even that was problematic. And so once you get the engineers in there who are truly looking at the building, the committee there were about a good dozen different locations that were looked at to put an elevator, and there is really only one, and that is by the stairwell. And then once you get those bathrooms upstairs, it generates some ADA compliance issues, namely the fire escape, from the second floor down to the terrace. If you're going to make that building ADA compliant and use it, this is what it costs.
Well, why did it only cost $1 million a year ago and now it's another 1.8? That's where I'm baffled. I never heard that number before.
Yeah, Tiger, what's the headline for us as our elevator speech when we tell people, okay, here's the headline. We just spent $2.8 million. We got you an elevator, 2 bathrooms, and an outside ramp. And I'm trying to, is that really the headline, or am I missing something?
know, you're not missing anything. You got a compliant building is what you got. That's not really, you can't go and chew it up and say that it's an elevator and it's a couple of compliant bathrooms. Now you have a fully compliant bathroom. You have a fully compliant building that you necessarily are 30 years behind the curve on doing. You know, that's you should look at that as a selling point. One of the reasons why we did the town hall is because it was non-compliant. That was the main driver of the town hall, was that it was non-compliant. You know, this is the exact same main driver. It's your crown jewel, but in essence, not everyone is welcome. So if you want to have a headline, the headline would be that, you know, it's now everyone is welcome.
And I don't want it to come across that I'm not supporting the ADA upgrade. That is far from the case. I completely support that. I'm just surprised that the $1 million didn't go as far as I think we were led to believe it was going to go.
I think the question is still, what are we going to do with it? I mean, if we do 60 weddings a year, what is the value of this town, of this building to the town? And is it worth, it's not just 2.8 million, because there's HVACs on top of it. There's all kinds of stuff that is not in here yet.
Rich, what's the alternative?
Huh?
What's the alternative? Close it?
We said, Kevin, we said what we were going to do when I got involved, was we were going to seal it up so it didn't degrade, and then we were going to figure out what to do with it. Nobody's done any work on figuring out what to do with it.
Well, that's not true.
I think it's worth a lot of money, but it's not. But it's not worth a lot of money to us.
It's worth a lot of money. The building is used by a lot of civic organizations. The rec department runs a lot of civic and town activities out of that building. It's certainly worth keeping. It's certainly a historic building. We haven't spent any money on it to catch up in 30 years on ADA. It's the same reason why we ended up putting an elevator in the fire department, and the reason why we have ADA compliant roll-in showers on the second floor of the fire department. You know, this is what we have to do.
I think you can probably charge the rec commission to, and rec department to look at their fees a little bit more closely, you know, to make us competitive, to actually market the building. My understanding is the building isn't even marketed in the wedding magazines as a wedding site. We're putting 11 meeting rooms in the new library. Why are we not using Waveney House for our local organizations to be having meetings in a 25,000 square foot gorgeous building? So, you know, to the point of, we really have not gotten too far in how we're going to use the building. That's unfortunate, and we need to move forward with that kind of research.
Thank you, Penny. And I think one of the reasons why we don't market it is because advertising costs money and we don't have any money.
We won't have a lot of money after we spend 2.8 million either.
Guys, this is Mike. What I don't understand, I know the question's been asked several times, but we went from $1 million last year, which was very difficult for, I think, some of us to swallow, including me. Now we're at 1.8. I mean, do we have an itemized, contract? Do we have anything showing, line iteming, what's costing $1.8 million? Because as far as I understand the ADA compliance issue, because I have a little bit of experience with it, you know, historic buildings have to be ADA compliant to the maximum extent possible. So there's like a specific code of federal regulation that kind of provides a little bit of wiggle room as to what is considered ADA compliant. So do we have some kind of cost analysis as to, to all the different ways that Waveney can be compliant and compliant to the maximum extent possible? It'd be great to just to see that breakdown as we're trying to understand, whether this type of money should be authorized.
And Mike, this is the kind of more in-depth research that had not been done on making the building totally ADA compliant. There were some assumptions made, and so until we had a state authority come in and analyze the building. Let me just give you an example. To get out of the two doorways out of the main room in Wakening House, those now have to be ADA compliant. And it's not just a simple ramp. You have to kind of terrace it's not really terracing, but the ramp is pretty significant coming out of those two doors to get onto the terrace. The side, west side ramp needed to be longer and wider and has to give the appearance of not being a secondary entrance, but a primary entrance, and the ADA compliant or individual would, be looking at not having to be, second class citizen. So there were a lot of other considerations that went into the analysis of the building that then, brought this cost up.
Again, is this something that's documented that we can look at, or is there a committee that can review, can tell us?
Sure. Sure. We can have the Leah Cromwell come and give a presentation.
Yeah, we could have the lead architect come in and give you a presentation to the council as to all the work that's slated to be done and why, and what
Right.
was what was done, the analysis that was done, and what the conclusions were, that what conclusions were made at the time, and how the project changed from one aspect to another, basically as you navigated your way through the building.
Yeah, I think that lack of communication is what's kind of sticking in my craw.
I think that would be a very important presentation, and I think that maybe we will all love the presentation, be convinced, and it'll be a much more successful project if we can get all 12 members of the town council to understand what you understand, Tiger. I think that is a very good use of our time. And if you could get her to present using Zoom at one of our next meetings, that would be great.
She
Pick which one.
just made that presentation to the Selectmen Advisory Committee on
Okay.
buildings. So I think Tiger, it's all ready, right?
Right. As Penny mentioned, she came to the advisory group last month, I believe, and so we can have her certainly come to the council and present. She's a New Canaan resident, so she doesn't have to travel far. So we can certainly have her do that for you.
I am very hopeful. When I hear Steve Carl say, what's the headline going to be? It speaks to the fact that we can't pass a big budget without understanding it. So let's just get a better understanding of that budget.
Certainly.
I would also say though, as far as communication, we had 2 members of the town council on this committee. You have a subcommittee, infrastructure subcommittee, and you make reports. So this project has been underway and reported on all along.
Sure has.
I don't know why we're, a lot of work has gone into this project, and
I don't know why a majority of the town council does not understand why it went from 1 million to 2.8, but that's where we are.
Well, again, I would ask the representatives who sat on that committee to try to explain it to the members here. Otherwise, it's not much point in having members of the town council on advisory committees.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on buildings, John?
No.
John, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Can you just talk about the Playhouse movie theater roof for a minute?
Sure.
Specifically, and with respect to the rest of them, when is this money going to be spent? It'll all get approved so that it can start being spent on July 1st. And so I'm just trying to figure out of the $3 million here, how quickly it drains. Those 2 questions.
How quickly it drains? Well, the Waveney work, this work is the latter part of the project, latter part of the year. The money doesn't come available on July 1. The money becomes available when you authorize the bonding, not the issuance, but the authorization thereof. So it can actually happen quicker than that, which we're hoping for. So we can actually start some of our projects and then maybe help jumpstart the economy somewhat after this virus concern. But as far as that will have to go out to bid, depending upon whether or not we get a favorable nod today. We can actually start to try to put things together. We try not to put anything together and put it out to bid without knowing that the monies are coming, only because we're asking our contractors to jump through hoops without us knowing whether or not it's going to be funded, and that's a little unfair to them.
Sure.
But I would look at, I can't say that it would get done this year, but our goal is to actually have that one done and put to bed. The heating system, that's going to take some time to design. That's an extensive one. That's a year or more. The gas conversions depends upon how fast Eversource wants to move with us. So it won't drain that fast. The majority of the draining will probably be in the latter part of the year, in the latter part of the fiscal year, I should say. So from January to June of next year, rather than July to January.
Okay. But this is going to be a right now project, right? This is
the roof.
This is a right now project.
Yeah, it's a right now project.
Can I just say
that's the question.
Can I say one thing about the roof, just as a reminder? Last year, we deferred it because it was a lot of money to spend on something that we weren't sure what we were going to do with this asset. And that was, if I'm remembering correctly, that was why it got pushed off and we just authorized repairs. Has anything really changed other than the fact I'm sure the roof is in worse shape, but have we gotten any further and what's going to happen with the Playhouse? Are we going to keep it? We paid $2 million for it. Is it worth, putting 10% of that money on top? It's already a sunk cost. Are we going to keep pouring more money into it? What's the plan?
Personally, I think it's important for you to have an anchor in the downtown area, specifically around this time now, moving forward after this crisis. I think it's important to have that facility there. I think it's an important town asset in the downtown area. So if it's an important downtown asset, we've got to maintain it.
I mean, I'm not convinced that we need to own it, but that's probably a conversation for another day.
That's beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. Whoever owns it is going to have to maintain it, and it is leaking now. So, you have an East School roof for $2 million. It's not really leaking, but you're replacing it because it's aging out. This building, if you intend to use the building, other than unless you want to just sell it, whoever owns it has to maintain it properly.
We have an obligation to the people that are renting it from us, leasing it from us, to actually give them a viable building that doesn't have concerns with it.
I'm just remembering the conversation a year ago, which was very different, but that's fine.
Okay, moving on.
Anything else on town buildings?
No. Can I just ask a question, just to go back to Waveney? When the architect comes and gives us a overview of the work, can we talk about moving departments into the Waveney? Is there space, like the Board of Ed, where we pay rent, that would offset the expense?
There's not room in Waveney for the Board of Ed.
On the second floor, nowhere?
I don't think that there's ample space, no.
You need 9,000 square feet. It simply doesn't work.
They've already been there. I took Brian through that probably 2 years ago, and there's not room for their needs.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. The highway department, their request is down this year from last year's $593,000. We have a wheel dump sander that we have to replace. It's a 2004, so she's 16 years old with 55,000 miles on it. Their expected life is 15 years, 10 to 15. We're 1 year beyond. This is our workhorse for every single storm. We have a lowboy truck for $53,000. That's 71,000 miles on it. She's 10 years old. and she fought 140 snowstorms that we can calculate. And their job is to do all the parking lots. So that's 140 snowstorms going backwards and forward and reverse all night long for multiple days on end. We have $60,000 for a wood chipper, $35,000 for a leaf system, $10,000 for equipment trailer, and then our equipment refurbishing requests that we utilize each year to try to keep our stock moving and out on the road.
Tiger, how many dump sanders do we own?
We have 13. So we're on basically one every year on a 15-year cycle. It works out pretty good. We have a couple of years where we don't have one slated, and we try to put in a loader at that point in time, or a sweeper or something else of that nature to try to at least even out our curve, as far as our requests, try to keep the line flat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions on highway?
Nope.
All right. Transfer station, quite easy. We have a large concrete stone wall that was initially installed when the transfer station was built. It needs to be rebuilt. This is a firm price from a contractor at $27,500. It's outside of our construction debris and yard waste area. You can actually see it, and it's starting to move and push out, and it needs to be reset. Maintenance on the equipment side, the request is down about $25,000 from last year. We have $55,000 for a vehicle with accessories. This is the exact same vintage as the highway department lowboy, 2011. We have $10,000 for our ride-on mowers. We have $63,000 for an articulating loader. That's to replace a skid steer. We're feeling that a skid steer is not as user-friendly as this articulating loader is basically a machine that will bend in the middle, and it'll actually help us on our trails and on our sidewalks for sidewalk snow removal, salt placement, and then work on our trails. We have $88,000 for a tractor. This was supposed to be for next year's request, but the tractor literally, the engine exploded. She was 20 plus years old. The bearings went, everything went on the tractor. It's not worth replacing at all. It's not worth fixing. It's basically worth scrap at this point in time. But it had served us well. Its age is indeterminate.
And you call it she.
You always call it she. You always call it she.
Does she have a name?
No, she doesn't have a name.
Okay.
There's $10,000 for a trailer replacement, and then we have a new ad or a new request. It's $48,000 for a flail mower with a debris catcher, and this is to actually mow our large fields, Waveney and Irwin. At Waveney Park, for us to get ready for the 4th of July, we actually have to mow the fields about 3 times or so to get the material down to mulch the material down low enough and small enough so people can put a blanket out. This actually, since it's got a catcher on it, will actually allow us to cut it once. Granted, it travels a little bit slower than the other mowers, but it'll allow us to cut it once and then remove the debris. Our biggest concern is invasive control. Right now, we've got the garden club spending $10,000 a year on goats up at Irwin. This actually will help us anywhere we cut that has invasives in it. We're actually mulching it or spreading it out into the environment. This debris catcher will allow us to catch the invasives and then dispose of them properly so that we're actually not propagating the material any further. So we can use it also in the large meadow that the Conservancy has already spent a substantial amount of money on invasive control already, or invasive removal. So this will help us to that end.
How big is that?
Basically, it's our version of a goat.
How big is that? How wide is it?
I'm not quite certain. John, do you know how wide that is?
Basically 5 feet.
Thank you. Anything on parks equipment?
Nope.
Excuse me. Parks, fields, we have $484,000 there. We have $60,000 for field improvements. That's basically our standard to take care of the softball fields, baseball fields for safety upgrades. We have $100,000 for irrigation upgrades. Typically, that's been around $40,000 to $45,000, but our systems now are reaching the ends of their lives. So we're not just looking at replacing heads and things of that nature. We're actually having to replace mains and feeder lines. The thought is that we could take an entire system out. We have 12 separate systems. If we took the entire system out, it would cost us around $250,000 to put it back in again. We felt it was much more cost effective to go in and make suitable repairs and replacements instead of taking an entire system out and putting it back. We have $50,000 for fences and backstops. This was placed in our budget last year from the rec department. We have $12,000 for water fountain replacement. We have several water fountains throughout town. Scoreboard replacement for $13,000. We have replacements needed in the Orchard Field, Capo, and the Big Field. We have $50,000 to continue the work at Waveney for our exterior walls. This will be phase 3 of a multi-year plan. We had approximately $300,000, if not more, of wall repairs that need to be done at Waveney. And this is our small part to help offset some of the costs that the Conservancy is putting in. And then the major driver here on our budget is the $200,000 that Chris Shipper spoke of earlier for Bristow's master plan. Are there any questions on the fields?
Nope.
On the Bristow Sanctuary, Tiger, the estimates were 197,000 to 215,000. So your number is 199.5. So what's with that? Is that an actual bid number?
No, that's not. That's not my number. That's Chris Shipper's number.
That was what Chris Shipper presented.
Right. He presented 199.5. Basically, there was a range of numbers in there, and then he filled out each one, kind of putting a harder number on each one. And I think he split the difference on most of it, and he came up with the 199.5.
Okay. And it doesn't include anything in step 2, the improvements to the ravine or?
There's no, this is phase 1 strictly.
Just phase 1.
Right.
Okay.
There's 4 separate years phasing in there itself.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no, you're welcome.
Okay.
All right. I was trying to find his numbers. I apologize. The Nature Center, we have a little bit of money in painting for both the animal care building and the education annex slated for this year. I don't know if you have anything on the Nature Center, or if you just want me to go to the wastewater plant.
Sure.
All right. And the wastewater plant itself.
Can we go back? Can we go back?
Sure.
The
Where do you want to go?
Nature Center, we already budgeted to get rid of the greenhouse, and that's happening any day now. It's got a demo sign on it.
It's got a demo sign on it. That's correct. We did have a resident come forward and file for an extension, except for the fact that they were outside the time frame slated necessary. There's a wait period on the building code, and they were outside that for that complaint. So yes, we'll be moving forward with that.
And that work is part of the current year's budget.
That's current year's budget. That's correct.
Already approved.
Right. And this money here, this $20,000 and $18,000 is already included in our town building request. It's not additional money at the Nature Center. It's actually included in bills. I just separated it out so you could actually see it, to see exactly what we're spending on the Nature Center itself. But yes, that demolition will go forward. We can't find anyone that wants to take the greenhouse or utilize it. We did ask Lloyd and Berman if they wanted it, Lord Berman, but they don't want it either. They're the manufacturer. They didn't want the facility either. You basically, based upon the 3 people that we had there to review it, their feeling was that in order to do the work and actually restore it, you'd have to take the whole thing down and rebuild it. Basically, taking the material that was there and disposing of that material and then rebuilding it with new materials to try to get rid of the glazing and the paint and everything else that was there. It wasn't worth the time to strip that all down. It was much more cost effective to build it back new. And the Nature Center has no use for the building or the greenhouse as it stands. They have use for it as another planting bed for community gardens and things of that nature, but they have no use for that type of greenhouse.
Tiger, but is the demolition of the greenhouse in this budget?
Last year's.
Last year's budget.
Okay, just want to make sure.
No problem. You approved that last year, but thank you.
Okay.
So that's one building down.
We had one down already, then I got a goat barn that came back, so we're even. We'll try to get one more down. We'll go from 57 to 56, see what we can do. Yeah, excuse me.
Audubon House goes next.
Yep.
Everyone has their opinion, I guess. There are others that people have told us to get rid of as well. If we jump forward to the sewer department, the sewer department's request, what we're looking for is $78,900. We still have $20,000 from our zinc study. We're continuing to run pilots whenever we can, as far as whenever technology becomes available. We run a pilot to see exactly if it'll work. And then we report to the DEP and the EPA. With that, we haven't found any technology that will satisfy. However, as far as phosphorus is concerned, we are making permit each month. And then zinc, we are making our interim limit. We can't make the limit on our permit, but we can make the interim limit with the processes that we're utilizing right now. We have another submersible pump that needs to be replaced, and our annual sewer rehab for $10,000. That's where we do about a third of the quarter to a third of the system each year. We go through, we vet it, we check it, we TV it, and then we take care of any anomalies. We do have $200,000, excuse me, in there for a collection system inflow evaluation. The last time we did that was when we built the plant or refurbished the plant in 1998. So it's 20 years past. And the feeling is that we need to do it again. One of the things that happens is that every single time it rains, our flow goes from basically $1 million, a million gallons to 2 million gallons. So the feeling is that we have to find some of this of these issues, this inflow that we're having, this inflow problem. And then the last part of the money's $600,000 is for a new CHP unit at the wastewater plant. That will help power the plant itself with natural gas, and will actually help power some of the highway department also. So the feeling is that the payback on this, based upon the consultant's analysis, is somewhere between 5 and 6 years that we will get our money back for this installation. It's currently out to bid. We were supposed to have a walkthrough tomorrow through the facilities. We delayed that because of the virus concerns. We're actually going to utilize Zoom as our meeting source, and we're going to have somebody walk through the building, showing the building, and everyone else can view it and ask questions, and then we can tape it, we can record it, and then send it back to prospective bidders. But we have to put that together, and hopefully next week we'll do that walkthrough utilizing this new technology that we've been brought forward. This 200 and the 600, or actually this $800,000 we're asking to be taken out of the major maintenance reserve that we have. That is amply funded at present. And I think both are very good uses of that money. I don't have any questions about the wastewater plant itself.
Nope.
All right. That pretty much does it. To kind of recap as to where we are, our budget currently stands at -2% for our operating. Our capital is an increase of 5.61%, including the additions from other departments. And overall, we're at a 1.2% increase. And as always, we thank you for your support.
Thank you for all you do.
Thanks a bunch.
Anything else, John? We good?
We're good.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Drive home.
Thank you, Tiger.
Thank you.
Okay. That ends the presentations portion. We can go into committee reports, or we can motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor, raise your hand physically.
Hey, John, one more thing before we go.
Okay.
Could we just have a moment of silence? We just had the first death in New Canaan of a corona virus. The gentleman that was 91 years old has passed. So.
Oh, no. Oh, he's a friend of mine.
So let's just offer up a moment of silence for the family. Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn. All raise your hand and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.